press. Haha. Looks like we're good.
Yep.
Oh, it's just seasons and weather still. I gotta change that real quick. Well, I did forget something. There we go. What's up, Traeger?
Oh yeah, I need to see. This is my brain is all over the place, man.
Oh, I understand.
And in none of the places it should be.
Yeah. Completely understand that. Let's see here.
Back in 2001, when we first began working with Gary Gygax, he pitched this wonderful series of books to us. He called them the Gygaxian Fantasy.
Yeah, it was a really good weekend.
Yeah, excellent. Well, let's when we get on, let's talk about your games real quick. Once we get on, how's that sound? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That we could use in making
And
our
how
games,
Patrick did not get killed this time.
Yeah, which is hysterical because he always gets killed.
Whatever it may be. And there was really no end to what he envisioned this series to be. We eventually published The Canting Crew, The World Builder, Living Fantasy, 7 volumes in total. We had another 3 that were ready to go to print, another 3 or 4 after that we were working on. So the series was really open-ended. We are bringing these back. That's what this Kickstarter is. We've got 7 books online ready to be printed. We've got another 3 right after that we want to get it minimally out as we were working on them at the
stuff.
time.
Just doing all my
They'll be
checks.
definitely in PDF.
Blue Joy, what's up?
The Kickstarter does, and maybe even more than
Hey guys.
once
saw
we
you on
beyond the
saw
necessary
you on the
stretch goals
afternoon
and all that
stream
mess.
there. So
But,
yeah,
welcome
hello.
to the what we're calling the Gary Gygax World Building Archives. And please give us your support. Share it around if you can.
See if I can get the
Pledge if
sound
you
down
can.
on this.
Whatever you need to do, whatever you can do for us and the memory of Gary Gygax, we very much appreciate it.
Trollord Games.
What's up, Greg?
Join the fray.
I caught it that time.
Hi, welcome to Gamescape 3D. Today we're going to be going over our release of our gigantic cliffs.
Wow.
We have a lot to go over, so let's get to it.
Oh, that stinks.
All right,
That's
before
funny.
we jump in and see how this thing is
All right, let me get
standing
up
out,
all
let's
my
look at
individual
some of our
shout-outs
smaller
here.
Features. Some of these figures out of the way. All right, you're going to have a folder in there called
Keep an eye out for Anna.
Magnet Face Cliffs. Those refer to a few specialty items that we have here. You can see this
What's up,
tree
Jeremy?
right here. Actually just pops right off.
If you have any questions
And
about your
after you
character
pop it
sheet,
off,
let
you
me
can
know.
go
But I think it's
ahead.
pretty self-explanatory. I have everything on
I
there
have
you
a
need.
door.
And all the
Piece you
calculations
can swap
pre-done.
in there.
Irrespective
Also
of any
just have a
spells or
plain
anything like
cliff
bless
face
or
you can
whatever.
Swap right. You can.
But you should be good.
You can pop in there. Okay.
For Saturday.
So
Running
let's say you're
Good deal.
on
Running a
adventure
two-parter,
and,
kind of a two-parter.
you know, someone
different
says a
groups.
magic
One
word,
Thursday and
maybe
an
that
edge
makes
group on
a
Saturday
door
night.
appear,
So it'll be fun.
in the side of a
Oh,
cliff
excellent.
Yeah.
for you to enter inside or
I
whatever.
saw Thursday's group has Curtis
So,
and
this
Yeah,
one right
Coco,
next to
yeah.
it is
Yeah,
the
Coco.
acceptable one. We've
Curtis
got the
playing
cave
Fritz, of
entrance.
course.
excellent.
These
Yes.
things blend in real well on the tabletop, as you can see.
He is playing the
So there we
man,
go.
the myth, the legend,
cave.
so or something.
Cave. Just that simple. Okay.
That should be the tagline.
And
The
then
man, the myth,
our
the
last one
something.
is down
Yeah,
here.
he's something.
Shelves right here.
Funny
This
thing
whole
is now we got
comes
3
off.
thieves in that group come for Thursday, which is
Okay,
funny.
and there's your magnet
We got
faces on the back.
a human.
You're also going
Well,
to
he's a
have
thug,
open
but he still
locks
has the
everywhere.
good
You
thief
have
abilities,
magnets.
and then we have
Most
a
of the time
gnome
you're
thief
gonna
and a
wanna use
halfling thief.
magnets.
So
We're using
Nice.
yeah,
3 by 8 millimeter magnets on this. I needed something with a little more punch than the 2 by 6s I usually use. So you can see the open locks
Almost to the
being
end of the
useful in
shout-outs,
some
yeah.
cases. Mostly, I think you'll want to use them on side-to-side connections potentially,
that's it.
because you will get
I think
into
that's it.
situations where the magnet polarity isn't
Yeah, 'cause
set
I
up
need
correctly for what you want to do.
Okay.
And those
All right,
open
so we're
locks
waiting for
will
Anna here. What time is it? 6:50. All right,
override
we're good.
The magnets.
What are your
pushing
cat's name?
away from
Coco?
each
There you
other.
go.
In terms of this base,
She's
here,
Coco
you can
Bunny,
use
though.
Any 1/4-inch material.
So
I'm using hardboard
Hey, John.
here. You could use.
This is a deep dive, so I'm waiting. I'm curious to see what deep thoughts Les has tonight. Right?
Oh, I'm incapable of deep thought on a Wednesday.
Well, a lot more than a lot
there's the
deeper than
hardboard
my
I'm
brain
using.
goes when it comes to this, because
And these set right on top.
you know, it's like I don't even know what I classify as horror. You know what I mean?
Move these.
Well, that's one of the things. One of the things I want to touch on. There are a variety of different kinds.
Yep.
Okay, so
And also, one of the things I want to touch on is,
these are just the
of
tops
course,
of the
how
clips.
some of
Your
these
board sets right
classic
in here.
stories,
You
and I'm
do not
going
need
to
cut
shamelessly
precisely. We
plug
got
Wiley
a lot
and
of overlap coverage
sure.
there.
Mateus's
As
podcast
you
for this,
see,
because we've been
in
doing the
most
Appendix N
cases,
stuff
most
there,
spots you're
and
looking
we've been
at
covering a lot of
up
these
to an
works
inch of
that
coverage.
influenced.
So
So
you
for
know,
a
if
deeper
you're-
dive into that,
if you're within
refer
half an
back
inch,
to some
that's
of the
gonna
podcasts.
Very cool.
But
take
like some of the
care of it.
some of the influences and where they
And
went
then
with
we
them
have
in
magnets.
the
These
early
things
game
just
and how
pop
that's
right
kind
in
of
there.
taken off and how
hold
DMs
things
can
into
present the
place.
horror.
That's
These,
great.
this one
In a
here is
Greyhawk
an earlier
context.
one. You
Here
can see I went a little
comes Anna.
deeper. I decided to change that for the one I'm releasing you, so you don't have
Hello.
so much 3D
Hello.
print
Howdy.
coverage going back.
Hello.
It doesn't
Howdy.
really interfere if you're just doing a cliff face.
Good to see you, Anna.
But if you
Yeah,
form
good to
these
see you
things into
too.
an entire
Or at
beat,
least hear you.
that
Oh,
actually
Oh, you're
say you
here.
can't
ended
see
up
me.
taking up a
No,
lot of
but that's
surface
good.
space.
Yeah.
I'm invisible.
So trim that back
Yep.
a little bit. So there you go. That's how those
There we go.
top plates hold into place. There are a few features that I'm not showing today that will be available in your kit.
Greetings, DM John,
Each one of these
Astrolar,
clips
and DM
We'll
Chris.
have a half version, so that's
And
going to come
everybody
out to about
out there.
135 millimeters on this.
Astroliar
this
is
upper
playing
print
with the
part.
2 drink
So you
minimum
can
group
print these
on
tops. I do not have that available
Saturday.
for the swappable
Coolness.
faces, but everything else does have that available. I also have 2 turnout corners.
It's
that
easy,
turn it
man.
in.
I
And
tell
also
everyone
have
where
a
to go. You
3-part,
don't need to worry about it. Grouping in, I tell
switchback-
everyone where to go, and you get a lot of
switchback
special hero
trail
points
that
go to the
I will
ladies, and
use as a
you
painting
guys
demo about
and
the
Ed,
middle of
and
the
then
month.
all the other guys like you and Eric
So
and Eric
that's
Boyd don't get
something we
any.
got
It's that
to
simple,
look
Jeremy.
forward to. Right.
Tends to
Let's,
be the way it
flip this
goes.
thing
No,
around
you get
so
some.
we can get a quick
Just depends on
look
the
at the
group.
back
So
side of it.
it'll be fun. It'll be a part 2.
Okay, here we are on the back side of the
All right.
cliffs.
I think I got all my
can
shout outs
see
done. I always think
The
I'm
cliffs
forgetting one
themselves
thing.
provide quite
But
a
I
bit
think
of support.
this time.
So
That's
if
where
your
mine more. If it comes up
platform's
as a
only gonna
first
be
time
7
chat,
or
is it
8
a new
inches,
account or
you
something?
probably don't need any additional support. The cliffs will take
That's
care
weird.
of supporting whatever platform material you set up here.
That's strange.
But if you go back like maybe a foot, 14 inches, you might want some extra back supports to keep this thing from tilting over. As previously mentioned, I have
Classic D&D
designed
reprints today,
some
everyone.
simple
After all those
mechanisms here
giveaways I
that you
did
can pop together. They'll provide you
Sunday,
the
I
support
tapped
you
out
need
the
on the
sponsors
back
for
end of
a
your
week.
platforms.
Well, we're back to Gamescape tomorrow night, but
The last feature I want to go
I'm gonna
over
strut things up
are
here.
slotted cliffs for a
Almost all winnings went out, with the exception of I haven't gotten in the labels yet for the achievement awards, and I got 2 sets of books from Frog God. I got to mail out myself, but everything else is out. So yeah, we're good. Subler Forth. We are good. Alrighty. Why not horror in the month of October? Horror.
Indeed, it's
Deep dive tonight. Maybe.
yeah.
I'm not, because for me. Yeah. What's up, Michael? I think you were sending me a Discord when I bounced off there, so maybe not. Okay, well, it's good to see it.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah, Frog God really stepped up with giveaways.
Hey, Sam.
Lots and lots and lots of good ones. There's Sam. Whew. 4-stream week. Again. I only did 6 during Virtual GreyhawkCon. So if you count and Legend Lore, that was 7 last week. 7 streams. Yeah. Yeah, man, it's all good. Yeah, so some point you can just drop it off. We can talk about it. I don't know their history. I didn't cross the bridge today. I didn't go into PA. So you're not getting me on that one. I was too busy. Too busy with other goofy stuff, work stuff, yeah. Alright, here we come. Look at that, we're 5 minutes early, so. What's up, Mac?
Hey.
Yeah,
Hey, Dave.
DM Geezer Jim was talking about Planescape and hopping and all that stuff, and he couldn't. And I had to say, he's like, I know there's one for Greyhawk. Yeah, I said Gray Space. I'm like, I was just lurking there while I was doing some work stuff. All right. I hope everyone enjoyed Virtual GreyhawkCon 5 as much as I did. It was a great another weekend, but now we're back on a regular, I guess you could call it a regular schedule.
Yep.
For at least the next couple of weeks. I got Anna with me, and I got Les, Oblivion Seeker, Invisible Conjurer, with 100 different names with me there. So, yep. It was.
That's a future topic, Gary.
That's funny.
Uh-oh.
We could do that, and then I could get banned for 30 days. But
I was just going to say that needs to be off stream.
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't think that's a good idea there. So, Les, we didn't hear about since yours weren't live stream. Why don't you tell us about your games real quick about Virtual GreyhawkCon?
Oh dear. Well, let's see. The Friday night 5th edition game. What to say about it? It was fun. The players had been hired to go beneath Spinecastle's Roust Ward and make their way towards a house that had been occupied by an orc pugilist named Hellbreaker Hank. This house was right on the border of territory claimed by the Temple of Grumpsh and the Temple of Erythnal.
Ooh.
So kind of disputed territory, and this guy had just taken over the house, and someone wanted to know, first, who is this guy, really? Second, how much money does he really have stashed away in his treasury? And third, torch his house when you're done. Unfortunately for the party, as they were going through, they were following a map and following the route through the Undercity to there were some portals, and they wound up hopping between levels of the Undercity and encountering some traps and some strange figures in masks and robes who were obviously up to some nefarious business. And ultimately, it turned out that the house that they had sought to penetrate, the inside man, if you will, or inside goblin, as the case may be, left the cellar open, which allowed ghouls into the house. The violence that the ghouls inflicted caused the Temple of Erythnal worshippers who had been keeping an eye on this, just waiting for an opportunity to begin their great purge. The players managed successfully to make off with a bunch of loot, and as they looked back after they managed to resurface, they realized that the Roust Ward is on fire.
Yeah.
So some of the key words for that adventure included exploding ghouls. Don't look at the statue. There was a statue filling up the room with water, and Patrick decided he wanted to inspect it, and that's when the gray ooze spurted out and hit him. Yeah, there was a good time was had by all, I think.
Oh, that's
and I got to
awesome.
say, Gary, and there you go. Gary points out he has to live a day in his own Spinecastle every virtual GreyhawkCon as punishment for helping create
punishment for yes.
That's awesome. Yep.
Yeah, there's bad
Thanks,
and there's
Gary.
worse. Yes, in that.
Thanks, Gary, for that kindness.
Very cool, man. Great.
And we also had someone from the community, DM. What does he go by? Again, and I hate to. I certainly hope that this isn't rude of me. I'm forgetting, but it was one of your regular listeners actually wound up listening in.
Okay, yeah. What's it? Oh my gosh. Uncle Fuzz?
No, it wasn't
No.
Uncle Fuzz. But
Yeah, you told me about it. It was cool.
It was
yeah.
DM Malarkey. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Popped in, and that was great. It was good to see him get enthusiastic about it. And then Saturday's game, the first edition game, the Return to the Strange Stone Dwelling, where a group of wherein a group of elves, half elves, rangers, etc., went into the building that had been in the Hools in in last year's game. It had reemerged in the Gnarly in this year's game.
Aha.
And strangely, the druids, when they'd contacted the trees and spoken to the trees said of the clearing that it was in, "What are you talking about? The trees are right there. The trees didn't go anywhere. The trees are still in that space." But then they started speaking about the trees in the past, present, and future tense. So these adventurers go in.
Oh, different time.
And they encountered, let's say that they had a number of misadventures. Patrick almost picked a fight with a Rakshasa bookseller who appeared to be a midget and who summoned some ogre magi guards to get the party out of his library / shop. Much mayhem, much chaos, much fun.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear you had a good time too, and I'm glad everyone else did.
Oh, I've got to say they were great players. They rolled with the punches. They kept me on my toes, and
Great.
it was successful. I look forward to seeing some of them, I hope, again next year. And I've got some people who expressed some interest in perhaps doing some guest starring gigs in my regular game, which is always a good thing too.
Yeah, you gotta have guest stars. I got a super guest star tomorrow night, as you know. So I'm just kidding.
Oh, and you may have seen Gary's comment about Saturday's game. He's convinced I was under hallucinogens at the time, but
it's always possible. You know,
now I don't. No, I'm convinced that the players were on hallucinogens. I was merely the dealer, man. But there you go.
Now, I'm going to give you the best comment I heard about the whole con, and it came from Anna. I asked her, "How about Tim's game?" And she goes, "The first hour I hated it, but that made me love it so much more in the end." Right? Tim.
But that's I think that's it's like a good movie. You need to have the low points in order for the high points to really strike home, so to speak. So yeah.
So that was cool.
Correct, history prof. I should have said little person. I do apologize.
Yes, but we're old and sometimes we can't be taught new tricks, right? Because, we're just stupid sometimes. So that's okay. I mean, we all, nothing was meant by it, so of course. Thanks, Gary. 51 months. Oh my gosh. Over 4 years. So let's head into our new topic for this week.
Yes,
now,
indeed.
We did this topic, I don't know, a year ago?
Something like.
Maybe a little longer than that. I lose track of time.
We've done horror and monsters and things like that.
We're going to deep dive this puppy here. So, where do we start on a topic? Hey, Patrick, on a topic like this deep, like, I'm skimming the surface. I'm just going to go over some Halloween stuff that I've done the last couple of years, and that's what I'm doing.
I'm going to throw out 2 questions that should immediately come to mind.
Okay.
Why horror in Greyhawk? And what do we mean when we talk about horror, let alone horror in Greyhawk?
Good
as to the why, if you look back as far as the original white box and some of the monsters in it, or the Greyhawk supplement, and I'm going to touch on this in a little bit, you have elements that are drawn from not simply fantasy literature,
right, or not medieval fantasy literature.
Exactly, we have it drawn from weird,
that's the difference.
From weird fiction, horror fiction, science fiction which borders on horror.
Right.
You have a variety of sources. Also, of course, some of the early iterations of the game. For example, Rob Kuntz incorporated a number of elements from Clark Ashton Smith and from Lovecraft's mythos into the game, some of which made their way into published Greyhawk material. So there's that element. There's that element where you have a borderline dark fantasy / horror vibe going on.
How about you, Anna? And go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then the as for the next question, what do we mean by horror?
Yeah.
Horror covers a multitude of sins, if you will. You have different styles or modes or subgenres. You have your survival horror, which you can think of like your zombie apocalypse or your Italian cannibal film, something like that. The whole horror is that everything is out to get you, right? And the whole point is just to try and stay alive. And the question of whether or not it's even worth staying alive. You have gothic horror, your horror with your castles and your doomed, romantic anti-heroes or hero villains. You have, and ghosts and things of this nature. You have supernatural horror, which also has ghosts and other types of creatures from beyond the ken of man, if you will. You have body horror, which has to do with the boundary of your own flesh breaking down and the idea of disease and transformation and metamorphosis.
Yeah, folk horror.
Folk horror, which was next on my list, which draws on folkloric
fairy
traditions.
tale stuff is in there a lot,
and a lot of stuff like that. Yes, and you also have elements of like science fictional horror, like you may think of Alien, that might spring to mind immediately, but also say the first Terminator film in particular, where if you could think about it in some ways, it's almost like a slasher film in that you have this unstoppable killing machine hunting down somebody and just wreaking havoc in its wake. You have the Predator films, things like that. And then you have, of course, their precursors in the pulps and in comic books and in movies. So this is what I mean. And there's a variety, just as I've said before, that Greyhawk is a kitchen sink, but that is a feature, not a bug.
Right.
You can incorporate all kinds of different horrors within Greyhawk, depending on where you're setting it and what you're trying to accomplish. And I also want to just upfront say, it's also a matter of knowing your players' sensitivities, and being able, and I don't mean this in any kind of, let's all, I don't want to leave aside the question of political correctness. Sometimes it's just rude if somebody has a particular trauma. It's just bad form to rub their faces in something that they find traumatic. So it's good for a DM to know their players pretty well, or maybe establish boundaries, or have some kind of idea of lay out where you're going to go with things. You don't have to give spoilers, but you can say, some of this stuff might touch on certain subjects.
Okay, fair enough.
Because, you don't want to, again, you don't always know everybody at your table. And you want to be upfront with them, which is why if I do something that's going to be kind of dicey in a con game, I'll mention, this game is for mature audiences and contains graphic violence.
Santa, your initial thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Les. And what I want to add is that it's tricky to run a horror game, so to speak, because you need to balance, because you want the players to, it needs to take, in order to be scary in some ways, it needs to be serious enough to be upsetting in some ways, but it's a balancing act, and because it's like going and watch a horror movie. You want to be scared, but you don't want it to be an awful experience in any way, shape, or form, so to speak. And that is really, really tricky. And I'm also thinking that this is it is touching all the themes. Of course, that's obvious, but it also has, or should have at least, some form of mechanical component, meaning you need to affect the characters mechanically in some ways for it to be real in a game, in an in-game perspective, so to speak. Your characters should be in danger in different ways than just losing hit points or something. That needs to be, and that can happen in many different levels. And that's where I think an often underutilized way, and that is something that ties into game system. Some game systems have way more of this. Classic D&D has it as one of the staples, but when it comes to mechanics, there is very little mechanically to facilitate this type of play, so to speak. Other game systems that are built around it, you have sanity rules, you have all sorts of stuff, meaning that your characters should be on the balance on going crazy and die from some horrible thing that happens to it in some weird way. That is the core of the rules, so to speak. So how you go about introducing horror and how you use it mechanically, that needs to be up to both your play style and also the game system you're using.
I'm
And because,
actually
yeah,
I'm actually
please.
going to suggest some resources for assisting DMs with that sort of thing.
Mhm.
For example, if you use 5th edition or Pathfinder, there's a wonderful book which Jason Bullman actually, I believe, wrote the introduction to, which is Sandy Peterson's Cthulhu Mythos for Pathfinder or 5th edition.
Oh,
And it
okay.
actually incorporates optional sanity law rules
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. But then it gets into something, and I kind of want to raise this point here too, Anna, which is when we're talking about horror, I noticed Sam and a lot of people, of course, will talk about Lovecraftian horror, and I would recommend, just for a little bit of an overview on Lovecraftian horror and its various iterations throughout the decades, Wiley Hobbit and Matthias are kind enough to have me on every so often on their podcast to go over some Appendix N and adjacent material. And this week or months happens to be the Cthulhu Mythos and its impact on early D&D and Greyhawk. So I highly recommend, if someone's interested in that they go and check that out. Now, in terms of the
Nice, Murphy.
mechanical thing, what I would say that Peterson points out, and I think this is important, is that you kind of have to decide what kind of game you're running also. Because in Call of Cthulhu, there's almost an inevitable sense of doom at work there. With
Yeah,
whatever
true.
victory your party may achieve, somewhere somewhere down the line, that evil is just going to keep eating away at the reality. And your sanity, the longer you play as a single character, the greater the risk to your sanity is going to be. Whereas in something like Dungeons and Dragons, I'm thinking that you look at the sword and sorcery kind of pulp roots of it, and you can think of how Robert E. Howard or Clark Ashton Smith, who was a huge influence on Rob Prince in particular, um, how they took elements of the Cthulhu mythos and used it as a kind of dark flavoring, where you have
Okay.
these characters face these monsters that are unspeakable and evil, and they survive, and they manage to, go and laugh and carouse and drink afterwards. But there's always that knowledge that somewhere in that space between spaces, in that whisper that you sometimes hear in the dark, there's that evil out there, or that indifference, that cosmic indifference out there that could collapse everything. So again, the question is the evil defeatable? Is the monster defeatable? Or is it something that's simply going to snap your mind and it's of cosmic vastness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which would be one of the other things you need to consider when setting up this kind of a game.
So unfortunately for us, Jason Zavoda's been departed for a couple of years now, but he always run his game and he called it Cthulhu Hawk, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a deep love for that
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, Jason and I used to talk about authors and
Yeah.
books along these lines quite a bit.
And this is kind of interesting. This is one of the key areas that I felt that D&D wasn't up to the job. So when I create Hawk Tales, I'm thinking in this field particularly, there needs to be something more, so to speak, that the normal D&D doesn't facilitate. And I haven't really seen it, but now I have ideas, and I'm not going to sit here and preach right now for something I'm creating, but I have ideas, and I'm going to sprinkle them in through the 2 hours, and we'll see. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I think that there are stuff we need to do. And first of all, one of the things that D&D and most other role-playing games, they deal with the here and now. They don't deal with more systematic, bigger things, rarely, which is rare because that's where wargaming was very good at. Wargaming that D&D came from in its roots had a lot of these kind of cool things. They had units, they had bigger things that were interacted and from rules wise. And then as D&D and you start focusing on one character, then it's one character and the group against one or two creatures, and the rest of the world kind of goes away. And that's where I think you can make interesting connections, meaning don't make it just horror needs to be more than the characters are chipping away hit points or throwing magic at a monster and see who
Well, again,
prevails the longest, so to speak.
with that, and I think this goes just right quick. I also want to touch on the
Yeah.
fact Astral is correct. There are madness rules for in the DMG,
Yeah.
but those rules I think are. I find the rules that in the Peterson book to be a little more effective and a little more
There are many
useful when
different
dealing
ways
with
you can there are many
deal with that
different
kind
ways
of
you can
issue.
do it. Yep.
Also, of Sam mentioned Ken Height's work on
Yeah.
RPGs and horror, and I strongly recommend Height.
And that is this Nightmares of Mine, that one? Are we
Yes.
talking? Yeah. All right. So here.
And of course, you did have Heroes of Horror in the earlier thing. You've had all kinds of attempts at D&D, but here's the thing: is that D&D
Hey, TK.
is
Thanks
by
for the
its
shout-outs.
nature, how can I put this? A horror game like Chill or Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, the outcomes tend to be a lot bleaker.
Right.
Whereas
It's
they
the way the
can
game's
be
set.
bleak in this. The other thing I kind of want to drive home is that when we're talking about horror, there is and should be mechanical elements. There should also, I think, be, and this can't be underestimated enough, atmosphere. Because if one thinks purely in mechanics, it becomes an exercise in mathematics rather than one in emotion. And one of the purposes of horror as a genre, of course, is to play with terror and
sorry
fear.
to hear that. Yeah, so that's a great point, and I want to ask a trivia question of you both and the audience. Give me a module that should have felt very horror-like, but it didn't when it came out. It was cool, but I didn't get a horror feel to it.
Huh.
It's,
See, that to me, that would be Ravenloft, but there you go.
Yes! Good job! That's it. 100%. Right? I mean, this is a great adventure. I really thought it was fantastic. So, yeah, someone ban that person, please. Who we got on here? 491 Phantom, if you're on, if you can hack that one up, please let me know. Yeah, but it was a great adventure. It was cool. It was set up. I didn't get the horror feel from it. Now, maybe because I was still 18 or whatever 19 when I ran it, and I still hadn't come into my peak prime yet as a DM, but didn't get that feel.
It has elements where it could go horror, but again, it's one of those things where once you start tying in, like how it's set up and also the kind of narrative railroad that it's set on, that would be the other thing. Is that if this makes sense to me, if it makes sense to you, rather, the idea that if there's kind of as with a lot of Hickman's, and I don't mean to knock Hickman because I think he's done tons for the hobby, but there's that kind of narrative through line or railroad that the players are on.
Right.
And it's like basically each step is leading you to here's something that will help you in the next step. So it's like there's not that sense of possible danger or you walking into something completely unknown and just getting completely screwed or in over your head, which is one of the risks that you want. I mean, I think, again, I hate to use the comparison, but thinking of some of Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, right, or some of Clark Ashton Smith's kind of more sword and sorcery themed stories, or any of the stuff like that. Henry Kuttner comes to mind as well. You have this idea that you have this character who stumbles onto something, right? And then slowly it's like, they start finding bodies and there's a stench of death about the place. And they encounter someone who's just lost their mind. And then they start hearing a weird creaking. And it's like, do I turn that corner? Well, there's supposed to be a lot of treasure there. And so it's like that playoff between, the scene in every horror movie where the door is there, it's closed, and the audience is screaming at the person not to open the door, but you really do want them to open the door because you want to know what's on the other side. And you kind of want players to be in that kind of position.
Yeah. Makes sense. I spelled ambiance wrong. Yeah, and it's hard. I'll say this: it's hard to capture that. there are adventures that do capture it really well, and there's some things I thought like in the old days that really captured it well. And I didn't even have that one prepped, and I got to go find it. So, yeah. Where do we go from here? Is what I
I'm
want
going to
to.
start with one of the biggies. Someone was asking
Yeah.
about, deities or entities in,
Right.
and I'm going to start with one of the biggies and one of the obvious ones. I'm going to start with Therisdun.
Okay.
And I'm going to point out, Forgotten Temple of Therisdun to me is a far creepier module than Ravenloft.
Oh my God, yeah.
There's
I
that
agree.
degree of what's known and what's unknown. It starts off and oh, okay, so we're fighting these creatures to get in. The next thing you know, it's like, wait, what?
Yeah, yeah.
And the
It takes
normal
a
rules,
180 inside.
and you're wearing
100%.
these robes, and then you have the Black Cyst, which even the name is evocative to me of things that I find personally terrifying, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And again, this is something that comes out of Robert Kuntz. If you have the Dark Druids adventure that is available on the One Line Studios website, there's additional material there where he talks about having developed Tharsdun,
Right.
a dark god, and that was in turn inspired by there's a Clark Ashton Smith story. I keep mentioning him, but there's a god in one of his stories called Poseidon, and it was influenced. Tharizdun was inspired by that, and then Gygax, of course, took Kuntz's dark god and runs with it. And it's a very kind of old trope, the god who has been imprisoned and
Right.
whose release would mean horrible, horrible things. Also, on a source for that, I would recommend Oath Journal 12, the interview that Paul Stromberg did with Gygax, where he gives a little more of his thinking about both Tharizdun and the elemental evils, which is something I touch on in the recent podcast.
Wow. Speak of the devil, Les, that you mentioned that for tomorrow night and Saturday. That's all I'll say.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Well, I do try to be timely.
Yeah, that's pretty ironic. So, yeah, I ran this for 3 days at Founders and Legends, right? And we had a great time, and the ending was really got a little crazy. It really did. But they got through it, and we lost 2 people in the Apple room. So, yeah, we did. That's where Fritz made his name, by the way. He talks about it all the time. So I told him he was gonna. I said, your wisdom is so low. You need to make a wisdom save to not want to pick another one because you're just that guy, right? He has 7 wisdom. I said I'm making it at -4, and he rolled a 1. And he's jumping around, running around the table and stuff. It was freaking hysterical. So
also, even though this was kind of in the pre-published Greyhawk days, right? I mean, before the Greyhawk setting, as we think of it, was kind of published and codified. I do also kind of want to harken back. I mentioned Tharsdun and the games that Gary and Rob would run. And I don't want to go into it to too much length, but I do think it's kind of worth mentioning that you have way back in the day, the old days of Dragon Magazine, right?
Mm-hmm.
You had this whole debate that kind of shot up where let me see if I can find the issues again. Dragon 12 and 16.
I got them.
Yeah. Dragon 12 has an article that Tom Moldvay and Rob Kuntz wrote about the Cthulhu mythos in D&D. Now, this is pre-deities and demigods, of course. And
I'm looking to see which one it would be in here. Some thoughts on the speed of lightning bolt, sorcerer's scroll, fantasy forge. I don't see it in this.
Should be in 12 and 14.
This is 12. It's got to be here, but it's not under the regular articles. It doesn't appear.
I'll have a look in a sec.
Yeah.
But the gist of it is that what happened, the 2 of them collaborated on an article about the Cthulhu mythos. And This led to a response, I believe, 2 issues later, where somebody was complaining about their take on the mythos, which then led to Mulvey writing a response to the response.
Yeah, let me see here.
So
I'm scrolling through. There's Jim Ward, the Druids. Huh.
I'm pretty
There
sure
it
it
is.
was
I got
12.
it. I got it.
Got it? Yeah.
It just says Rob Kuntz. So.
Yeah, but I think Mulvey also contributed to that,
So
if
this
I'm
is
not mistaken.
pre-Dungeon. This is pre-DDs and Demigods coming out.
Yep.
So they got so we got all the Cthulhuans in here, all of them.
Yep.
Wow, and the Necronomicon's in here too.
Absolutely.
Huh.
And I believe, let's see, here we go, by Rob Kuntz. And it mentions that these were designed to be compatible with supplement for gods, demigods, and heroes,
Okay.
which is the old thing. Oh, there it was. It's my bad. It was. I apologize. I was thinking of Holmes, actually.
Okay.
It mentions here. Those of you, the great old ones, will know what it means. Blah blah blah. J. Eric Holmes, known for his work with basic Dungeons and Dragons, with additions by my humble self, bringing parts of the Cthulhu mythos.
Okay, cool.
So it was Holmes, as in Holmes Basic.
Did not know that.
And then this launched someone saying that their take on the mythos was entirely wrong. And then a few issues after that, you had the response, which was why the person is mistaken in claiming that they were wrong. So it was a nice back and forth.
Wow. Okay.
And you can see, and also worth noting along those lines, the gate spell in Greyhawk, the Greyhawk supplement, when it's mentioning entities that could pass through if you cast a gate spell, it of course mentions two interesting things, because this is of course pre-codification of Greyhawk and pre-codification of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, this is early.
You have two of the entities that can be summoned via gate spell include the Shining One and Cthulhu.
Wow.
You start high, so to speak.
I get, yeah. I don't even know what the
Yeah.
Shining One is. So
The Shining One is a translation of the Hebrew name for Lucifer.
really,
Yeah, basically Babel, I think is what it is, which then you translate into
Belial?
Hebrew. No, not Belial.
Oh, okay. Wow.
But yeah, so that would be it's kind of interesting that they start very big with things that could go wrong with gate spells.
Jeez.
And at any rate, I found that kind of interesting,
Yeah,
and
cool.
It's a nice bit of context.
Nice. And that's early. I mean, this is 78. So
Yeah.
Really, really early thoughts. Well before first edition, well before Greyhawk is out. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's in the supplement, but it's not out in its
Halil, I think, is actually Shining One. I might be mistaken. It's something like that. It's been a while since I've looked at that, but that'll be the general idea that gate spells can bring they can bring Odin. That would be the opposite. It means the gate spell mentions it could bring Odin, or it could bring this, or it could bring the Shining One, or Cthulhu.
That's an interesting mix, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it was like you said in first edition. Something will step through.
Yeah.
When you cast the gate spell.
Crazy.
Yeah, something, and it will be something powerful.
That's nuts. All right. So, hopefully I can find it. Let's go to the third one. So let's go. Here's my thing. This is not Cthulhu. This is not Tharizdun. It's not, because everyone goes, it's the same, and but we go down into the G series, right, and we go down into the the Temple of the Eye down here, right, in G3, right. So, what are your thoughts on this? The Elder Elemental God Throne Chamber that's here, and there's one in D3 as well, but it just says it's the same as the one in G3. So, as far as a lot of a horror. Like I always saw the tentacles writhing in this place, and once the drow had the tentacle walls, right? So
Adventures like this works really well, and I guess horror in general, if the players want it, so to speak. If the players are in on it
Right.
and that's the type of game they want, then it works. But it's like all role-playing game. The rules don't need to facilitate it. As long as if the DMs and the player have the same idea and are in for the same type of game, the rules need to work actively against it for them to ruin something, so to speak. So then it's easy. And so I think that's the key bit of advice as a DM to try, and I'm not an expert at this in any of their others. And Jason Bullman, for instance, he ran 10 Candles for me, and we were a bunch of people at PAX Unplugged a few years ago, and then Jason Bullman ran 10 Candles, and that was amazing. That was fantastic. So meaning if you're as a player are in on it, so to speak, meaning you want to participate in a horror story, you're looking forward to it, and you want to then it can work really well, and then you don't need to tweak. You don't need much in the form of a rule system to facilitate it.
But I think
yeah.
I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say there's one aspect to it more, and that's when the players. A lot of good players sessions is basically what I said about Tim's game when it surprises you, when you want you get something that you didn't even realize you wanted, so to speak. That's another way horror can be really, really good. But that means that it needs to sneak up on the players and the hapless characters in a way they don't foresee. And that's the tricky bit. And that's where I think mechanics in the right mix can help, so to speak. But it's really tricky, so to speak, because the players don't feel like they were trapped in the wrong way. They need to feel like they're trapped in the right way, so to speak. That makes it fun and interesting, and that's more an art form than a science, so to speak.
Okay.
Yeah, with that, Jay, I would say, picking up on what Anna is saying, I would add something else, which is, again, going back to the kitchen sink element. It's, how can I put this? There are ways. These modules are a great example because, of course, Vault of the Drow and Queen of the Demon Web Pits would be on my list of things that use horror nicely, or horrific elements.
Okay.
And that's set up throughout the G series, right?
Yep.
And what you wind up with here is horror as flavor, if that makes sense.
It does.
In other words, there are different ways of approaching it. There is you surprise them and you have a full-on horror. There's also, you've set it up and there's the trap, the twist or turn, and then the event itself, like the unveiling of horror, right?
Right.
But then there's also that way that horror gets spiked throughout the fantasy. It's if you will, the razor in the apples that are bobbing in front of the players. Where if they take a little bite, it might be nasty for them, but that apple sure looks appetizing. Sure looks juicy. And then of course you realize that there's something that had to have put the razor there, and that becomes the deep. As you unfold, as you unlock the mysteries of these things, it becomes deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. And that'll be the thing, is to tease and incentivize.
Exactly.
Like I said, you have the closed door, right? And you get to the point where the character is thinking, should I open the door or not? The audience is screaming no, but the audience is also thinking, open the door, I need to know what's there. You want your players in that same kind of position. And they're just tantalizing little clues. I mean, when in Vault of the Drow, the reference to torture parlors or torture salons, all it takes is that phrase.
Right?
Yeah. I'm not even sure
Poison
I need
shops.
the graphic. Exactly. Poison shops, torture salons, torture parlors. I'm not even sure one needs to elaborate. Now, the curious player might wander into these premises and might not come out. Or curious PC might wander in but not come out.
Right.
But the thing is that just the evocative name or the evocative phrase can be quite chilling. And that's another way that horror can operate, right?
Yeah.
And Greyhawk, I think, is full of that. You have all these wonderful places. Look at the Land of Ayus, right? Look at some elements in the Great Kingdom and things surrounding it. And we were talking about different gods. I still have stuck in my mind the description of like some of the rituals. It's just a brief passage that was in Dungeon Magazine, but I was speaking about Erythnal and just some of the brief references to Erythnal's rituals or Hextorian rituals or whatnot. Just the phrase. I remember the opening phrase of one paragraph. The litany is ghastly.
Yeah,
And
wow.
as soon as I read that, I'm like, oh dear. Because these are darker gods, and it really does give you some kind of sense of what kind of things. Where it mentions the cacophonous musical instruments and stuff ringing and blasphemous whispers and things like this, and you're like, well, this is either my kind of party or I'm going to head in the opposite direction and pretend I never heard or saw anything about this. So yeah, I mean that's exactly what you want, is that kind of attraction
Foreboding.
repulsion thing.
Yeah. It's hard to do. So hard to do. But
well, ask Patrick and company about the golden skull from the room the other day. I loved there was a golden skull in that room that was flooding, and it was picking up the skull even with a mage hand that triggered it. And the skull had "Cursed be the seed of Drakkar" etched on it. The skull is encrusted in gold. And the thing is that they eventually figured out that, well, some of them already knew Drakkar is a hero of an Aerdi hero of the Bone March, and the sons of Drakkar are his followers, people who tried to follow his example in bringing order to the Bone March after. You had the Flan, then the Flan were overtaken by the barbarians, the Sul barbarians. Here is someone who is going to impose the Aerdi principle of order on the land, and had undergone many tribulations. These were his followers, and this was what a priest or sorcerer priest had done to the skull of one of his followers.
Ugh.
And it had magical abilities, but are they good magical abilities or not? Is it cursed? Or is there some blessing underneath the blasphemies that were inflicted upon this poor sacred holy warrior's skull? I don't know. Do you want to touch it? I don't know. Do you want to activate it?
Cursed or not, right? Always those thoughts going through your head.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, aren't many things like that? I mean, it's that temptation. And
Yep.
Speaking of temptations, I guess that kind of leads me to another kind of creature that I like.
Okay.
And Rob Kuntz himself, over on one of his blogs.
Is this the Advent of the Elder Ones?
No.
I got that up already. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool.
This was going to be a certain type of monster. There's a kind of horror that I'm particularly fond of. And I know a lot of people think of these as gotcha monsters in a way.
Right.
I like to think of them as monsters that play with epistemology, or how we look at, that sounds pretentious, but how we perceive and know things, how we know things, how we understand.
Now you're getting into the juicy bits here. Yeah.
And I would say they're doppelgangers who, as Rob points out in one of his blog posts, it derives from the idea of changelings, right? Of children who are replaced by fairy children. In folklore, but it's more the science fictional aspect. Kuntz himself points out it's more the science fictional aspect that you find. To give you some examples, the pod people, or if you're familiar with Robert Heinlein's the puppet masters. Once a body has been taken over by the puppet masters.
Well, we did a bad adventure of that, though. It didn't translate. That's the problem, is getting it to translate properly, right?
Yeah, well, there was a game I ran at a virtual Greyhawk Con, and I know Grohe and I think Asher and some other people played, where it was a
Yeah.
unbeknownst to them, it was a village of doppelgangers.
Oh wow.
And also, I had incorporated from these were not Oifley doppelgangers, however. These were from a forerunner race of the doppelgangers. And I took something that Keith Baker had done as a third-party work, where he posited that mimics and doppelgangers and such are kind of related creatures at different stages of development.
Hmm.
And they at times they basically ossify into buildings. So the buildings that these characters were in were actually the ossified remains of ancient doppelganger slash mimicked slash imitating creatures. And within the walls were retained the memories of different beings that they have absorbed through the years and different things they had absorbed through the years. So these creatures could download, if they needed a priest to come and talk to you, they would just download, if you will, the consciousness of a priest and appear to you as a priest. And so it appeared to be a commune devoted to Pelor, but it wasn't. And things got really, really scary for the players. Alan almost got seduced up to a room by a barmaid, and the bed would have been a gigantic mimic had he gone up there.
Think of I mean, we have illusions, first level to ninth level,
yes.
but many different editions of D&D have played with and toyed with the eldritch magic or 10th level spells or higher power magic or whatever you call. Imagine what cool you can do with illusions when you take them up to the higher level. And that's where I think a lot of this horror can be, when instead of just one creature or whatever, when you can tweak with whole environments and you can fool senses completely and stuff. That's where I think you can do some really cool stuff.
That was what I loved about this was it was an entire
and divine
community.
power and stuff like exactly and divine power can do things. Meaning, how do clerics communicate with their gods when they receive spells? Is that something that can be verified? Can it be hacked? Can it be disturbed? Does it always function? How does it function?
Can it be mimicked?
Exactly. These are mechanical things that I think should be investigated. What kind of cool possibilities do you have for that? That's where I think you can have horror. What if a cleric can, no problem with the stuff you already memorized, but when you memorize new stuff?
If you remind me a little later,
and so forth. Yeah.
If you remind me a little later, mention Spine Castle to me again, and I actually have an example of something like that.
Okay, cool.
That's in my campaign.
Yep.
But with this, the other thing that I would mention is, again, for some more examples and a little more in-depth look at some of the literature that influenced this, there's a podcast episode on Unknown Worlds of Greyhawk, which is basically looking at Unknown Worlds, which was a pulp magazine, which was related to astounding science fiction, which then became analog. But at any rate, the authors who worked, the editor and authors who worked in this magazine, a lot of the fiction deals with these kinds of themes. In fact, the editor of both Astounding and Unknown, which is where the first Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser story was published.
Really?
But the editor of that magazine published a story you may know even if you don't know the story. The story is Who Goes There? And you would know it because it was adapted twice and most faithfully in the 1982 version of The Thing by John Carpenter.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which is another great example of the kind of horror I'm talking about, where, are you really my friend?
Yeah, that's The Thing is one of 3 when I was young movies that freaked me out and scared the shit out of me.
The music.
Yeah.
Ooh, the music.
Ennio Morricone score.
Carpenter's score is fantastic.
Yeah.
To this day, I've used that for my game preps and stuff because it's so good.
Yeah, that score was Morricone. Ennio Morricone scored that film for him. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
but
I forgot which one, The Darkness, or which one. There was one that Carpenter did. That
Prince of Darkness.
Prince of Darkness. Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that score is just fantastic.
By the way, the other 2 besides The Thing is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That freaked me out.
Love that.
And Phantasm.
Yes. Those balls, man.
Yeah, I could. Yeah. So Shining was slow.
And those little hooded fellas.
Yeah. Shining was cool, but it was so slow. Yeah. As a young kid, it was tough to get through it. then Scatman Crothers got the axe in the gut, and then you're like, okay. So yeah, but yeah, okay. Lot to digest there. So it feels like there's certain things that should be genre horror, right? And it's so, I don't know. Maybe I have the trouble. I had trouble with Ravenloft. I have trouble with vampires and mummies and all the exact things that you would think in like an old Vincent Price movie turning, or turning them, or what's his name, the man with the golden gun.
Christopher Lee.
Christopher Lee, right? Yeah, Christopher Lee, Dooku, and Saruman, right? Yeah, having those kind of it's tough. It's tough to take, and flip that into a horror genre. And
I think it depends on how it's played. I
Okay.
know that one of the origins of the cleric class apparently is, of course, that in Dave Arneson's Blackmore campaign you had Sir Fang, who was apparently a player vampire.
Oh,
And so someone wanted to get rid of Sir Fang or keep him in check, so the cleric class kind of helped develop as a response to that, as a kind of Van Helsing type, if that makes sense, initially.
really?
Yeah,
Did not
combat
know
Van
that.
Helsing. And I have to love the name. Sir Fang is a great name for a vampire.
Mhm.
But one of the things that I find really interesting about the vampire, you mentioned that, and going back to this idea of communities where things are wrong, I'm going to mention an example that I've deployed in my campaign, and it can go one of two ways, right? The first would be you have an isolated community. It's a small town, or no, not a town, let's say a village or a thorp, right? And this is where what I like to call the Salem's Lot effect sets in, which is where you have a kind of Peyton Place was a novel. It's turned into a movie, and it became a kind of TV daytime drama. But the general idea is you have this kind of respectable, seemingly nice community, and underneath it, it's just a hotbed of transgression, right?
Okay.
Everybody's doing all these horrible things. There's a major influence on Twin Peaks as well. But the idea would be, imagine you have this village and everyone seems nice and everybody's great, but there's this evil that lurks. There's this kind of transgression and horrible goings on that happen with the inhabitants behind the scenes.
All right. So
And
there is an adventure published that's on my wall of fame with that.
and then what that does, at least if you use the Salem's Lot model, is that draws in a greater evil.
Oh.
If you remember in Salem's Lot, you have
Hey, Bill.
all the melodramatic goings on, right? You have all the stuff with the townsfolk. And then, of course, Barlow and company, they arrive. And it's it's pretty much explicitly stated they were drawn because the town is rotten.
Yeah.
And you can think of It as another kind of example of that, yeah?
Yeah.
Where you have the town's history, Derry's history, and then you have its horrible.
So the one I'm thinking of, I don't know if you ever played it. The townfolk are all nice to you, but they're all it's kind of got a surprise horror genre to it. That's Dark Tower. The whole town around the old Dark Tower they're all
yeah,
and they let you come in and they welcome you in. So kind of almost part of N, but it's more of a trap. More like N1's got that too, a little bit, but not to the depth of Dark Tower.
You get that in also. I mean that's there's a kind of recurring motif. There's in one of I believe Robert E. Howard's Solomon Kane stories. Solomon and another guy are put up for the night at this inn. It turns out the innkeeper's a murderer who basically waylays strangers and kills them and robs them. And that's a motif. If you go look at Outlaws of the Marsh, the great Chinese medieval work of literature,
right.
There's a similar thing. There are these things called black taverns, where basically the innkeepers are actually, the people running the tavern are actually bandits. And they go ahead and they rob. When you're asleep, they kill you in your sleep, rob you, and then if there are any guests that they aren't robbing, you're on the menu the next day, even though the guests might not know it. And I kind of like that. There's something nice about that.
Yeah.
In a very, very gameable way.
Yeah, Patrick.
And yes, Temple of Elemental Evil has its There's if you check out the latest podcast, I kind of am speculating that the elemental nodes were influenced by what August Derleth did with the Cthulhu mythos by categorizing the old ones according to elements.
Yeah, I just didn't.
So
I mean, it's my favorite adventure, but I never used the nodes. They don't translate. They just feel like there's an area there. You know what I mean? And there's not much development in the
I think it's
module.
because it
Yeah.
was rushed and because
Yep.
Mentor working from Gygax's notes. It's a flawed work, but I think that the ideas that he's trying to convey are definitely there.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether it was a conscious or unconscious reference or homage to that, but it definitely struck me as kind of resembling the elemental stuff in Derleth.
Okay.
For what that's worth. And I go into that a little more in the podcast. But anyway,
Nice.
yeah. So what else was it? What else is there?
Well, Anna's been kind
Anna.
of quiet.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I just enjoy
Jump into the fray.
It's great. Yeah, it's great.
So let's bring this up. So there's certain monsters I love that, and you linked this one. It's the best picture ever done by this monster. You put it in late, so I'm glad you did that. Thanks, Enoch. And that's this was a great adventure too with Shokanth. I mean, by far it's my favorite Gibbering Mouther picture of all of them. There's so many like horror aspects in that adventure. I mean, there's that vampire walking around, right?
Oh yeah.
You got the sand traps, the will-o-wisps. It's all got it, and you can get this one you can get a real sense if you're not playing in the tournament style. If you're playing it just as a module, if you're playing the tournament style, everyone's rushing, right? But trying to get through.
I think that's actually from Hidden Shrine.
Yeah,
that's Con. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a question to you guys who run more con games and people are watching. How do you do when you play with strangers? You're sitting in a big room with a whole bunch of others, and you have to slog through it in 2 hours or 3 hours or 4, like a short amount of time, and it needs to be done, so to speak. Any tips and tricks to kind of get the horror? Should you just shock them? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll say, all right. I don't know if it was horror or comedy, but when I took puppets and I converted it to puppets and then some, I wanted to give them some like deadly attacks, like Little Bo Peep. Remember, almost killed Ravalantar with her freaking what do you call it? Her manger. What is that thing called? The hook.
Yeah.
Just
her little crook thing.
Yeah, the crook. Her crook. Yeah. And just try to give them all special abilities. Now, it probably came off as comedy, but still, I mean, having those things come out of the fireplace can't be a joking matter. So,
well, there's a thin line too. I mean, you have to.
Yeah.
Again, it would depend on what kind of effect I'm going for.
Right.
Because there is a place for horror as comedy. I'm thinking again of, and this is, but was apparently one of Gary Gygax's favorites. He apparently would watch it whenever it came on television. But that Roger Corman's film version of The Raven has these great moments of dark comedy, and camp.
Right.
But there's an underlying morbidity. It's where's your wife? She's buried underneath the table there. Well, of course she is. That kind of thing. And there's.
Yeah.
So am I going for a laugh? If I'm going for tension, I like to start with a subtle thing where something is slightly off. Right? And maybe
slightly off works.
Yeah. I mention it in passing. Like I don't even necessarily call attention to it. It's like, you're examining the room and you notice this and that and the other. And then later, if there's, and by the way, there's this other thing that connects to that thing you saw earlier. And there's a mounting kind of, see what I mean? It's a snowball effect where you start small and then the wrongness accumulates or accrues in such a way that the players start noticing that something's wrong and looking to find out what the source of that wrongness is. And just when they think that they've located it, wham, it comes at them from the opposite direction.
Right. Just like every bad horror movie or good horror movie. You're looking in one direction, good. It's coming from the other direction. Yeah, setting the tone. So, Yeah, you're speaking about like where a horror movie can go too comical. Hence, I give you, and this was pretty gory too at some points, but it was supposed to be horror, but it turned out to be like a horror comedy. That was The People Under the Stairs. Remember that movie?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's supposed to be funny because it's also a satire.
yeah, camp. Yeah, that's
So-
true. That's true. It had some camp to it. Yeah,
And you can think of also Reanimator, where there's an example of gruesomeness and
yeah,
humor.
that's true. Yeah, wow. You hit someone else on the head there with some of them. So very cool.
But the gibbering mouther I was going to mention is another great example of a creature that where there is a kind of debt owed, right? If you look at Deities and Demigods, the first edition that has the Cthulhu mythos on it,
Yeah, I got it right
if you were
here.
to look at page 47, the illustration of Shub-Niggurath on it,
Yeah, all the stuff
and
inside it. Yeah,
the description that it's that, and also the description and the way that the creature functions
it's
is
pretty.
reminiscent of in Lovecraft the Shoggoths, and also in Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith the formless spawn of Sathagwa. Speaking of frog gods and related entities. So yeah, it's very reminiscent of the gibbering mouther is quite similar in some ways to that kind of creature.
Yeah, yeah, it's a big
So there's
pot
a very
of
kind of
mess. Yeah,
mythos influence
yeah,
there as well.
yeah.
And again,
Excellent.
the idea that these creatures are examples of things that have gone wrong. If that makes sense, you just look at that and say, I happen to like the art style. I know some people don't. They're
Whose art
wrong,
is
but
it,
that's
by the
okay.
way?
I believe that's Otis.
Is it Otis? Okay.
Yeah,
probably is.
but it's just inherently wrong, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just look at that. It's spurting up things. There are eyes. There are things coming out of eyes. There are mouths with teeth. There are mouths with fangs and razor sharp. And you just go, no, this is just wrong. And that's another example of something that I like to do with players. Again, when you enter one of these places, when you enter some sort of unsanctified place or something that's adjacent to an eldritch abomination, things start going wrong. People get, there's a big joke about my flesh tunnels in one of my early games. Apparently that became a little joking meme, but that would be kind of the idea that you enter a chamber and suddenly the walls are no longer look to be of stone. And if you poke them, it leaves an indenture.
Mm-hmm.
And if you cut them, the walls start oozing a viscous fluid.
Yep.
And okay, you're not in Kansas. You're not in you're not in Ulick anymore at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also that would be another kind of horror Sam has touched on, and there's a bit of that in my Saturday game. The idea of Escher, not biology, but also geometry. In Lovecraft, a big thing would be non-Euclidean geometry.
Yeah,
the idea
true.
of spaces that are wrong.
Yeah.
I like the idea that one of the things, it isn't a horror effect, but it's certainly an unsettling effect. When my players were walking in a straight line, I pointed out that it felt to them as if they were walking at an angle up an incline.
But what's straight depends on how gravity works, so to speak.
Yes, except here's the thing: it's like you've thrown gravity, their perception of gravity out as well. If you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, gravity is affecting their physical reactions, but not affecting their perceptions. Nothing else in it. In other words, there could be things lined up.
Yeah, but just think of this. We perceive the Earth as flat, and we believe that we walk across
cool.
and when we fly and do things like that we fly
yeah,
flat. But we are on a trajectory like a curved one. You just increase and decrease and play with that, and meaning there's no way you can.
Except that in this case, the point would be that it's within an enclosed space, and it shouldn't. In other words, you shouldn't be thinking like this. You shouldn't be reacting the way that you are.
Yeah.
But because of the very nature of this place, the fact that normal rules don't apply to the spatial arrangement.
No, what I'm trying to say is that the rules that we think are there in reality are not there. If you've flown in clouds, you understand that. If you don't have the instruments, there's no way for you to tell what's up and down. And that's the weirdest feeling ever, so to speak, when you realize that the real world's physics playing with you and you can't trust your own senses. And when that is even possible in the real world without too much fuss, so to speak.
Well, let me give you
in the
another
fantasy
example.
world, you can do some really clever stuff with that.
Yeah, let me give you another example. I know it's one that I've used in terms of a room that my characters had to go across before, not in this past game, but another. If you are in space, which way is north? Now you can invent and impose a galactic north, right? You can arbitrarily create. You can create a galactic north, but in terms of that, your sense of directions, your normal the normal way that you measure these things doesn't apply here because you're out. It's a context specific problem. Your perceptions, and I like to play with that context specific perceptions.
Yep.
And I agree with you. That's kind of the vibe I was going for, is the idea that they're completely disoriented. And also north could be any other direction. And also time is operating differently in that the place that you're approaching keeps receding at a certain point until it no longer recedes. And it's taken you, say, 30 minutes to travel to where it would normally take you 5. In other words, if you were going off of how it looked when you first started moving, it would be 5. It should take you about 5 minutes, right? But the distance continued stretching. The horizon or the point of departure receded as you were walking, and it distorted the idea of space-time itself distorted. And I love doing things like that, and very carefully kind of one of the things that's fun to do with that is to catalog it and measure it. In other words, you don't just impose it, but it has an actual consequence on how time operates for the players. And how space operates for the players. In other words, if they do wind up traveling what they thought would be 10 feet, but it turns out to be 60, then the time that's elapsed is the amount of time it would require for them to cross 60 feet, right? Or you might play with time and have it be 10 feet. In other words, it was 60 feet, but somehow you start figuring out for each one of these kinds of local events or local areas what the effects are and how it alters their perception.
Think about changing planes, portals, teleportation, and stuff like that. And you can, if you start thinking of that in terms of real physics and then apply fantasy physics to it, you can do some really, really cool stuff.
Well, I would argue if you go into like a book I'd highly recommend is by Rudy Rucker, who's also a science fiction and science fantasy novelist, but he's also a mathematician. And there's a book by him called Infinity and the Mind, which is basically a history and overview and consideration of infinity, the concept of infinity, how we developed it, what we mean when we talk about infinity, how does one measure infinity, what are the different models for infinity. And it's really cool to kind of use some of those kinds of ideas and apply them. I mean, another example from early D&D that comes up again and again, and this is one that you find in both science fiction and fantasy, would be the idea, you see it in early dungeon magazines and so forth, of tesseracts, right?
Yeah.
And tesseract dungeons. And those can screw with a player like nobody's business, because again, it's that idea of how space normally is supposed, how they think of space, what we take for granted about our perceptions of space.
Isn't Roger Moore's Baba Yaga's hut a tesseract dungeon?
It has elements. It has elements of that kind of thing. I mean, most of these, when you start dealing with these, but it's not. I don't know if I describe it as a true tesseract dungeon. There's an early article that I think is in one of the best ofs that actually gives a kind of layout.
I think it's in 2. It's an early best of. Yeah, really early on tesseract dungeons, which is kind of cool. Pain to keep track of, but cool.
And I mention this because it just gets into something. We talked about cosmic horror, and one of the things that cosmic horror deals with would be the idea of entities from, entities that exist where sometimes we can't see them, right? Or they come from the depths of time, like time beyond what some people call deep time. Like time, we're not even talking about the Earth's history. We're talking, ancient, around the time of the Big Bang
Yeah.
kind of timelines. And when you start getting into that stuff, or when you start getting into the concept of what happens to something that hits the event horizon of a black hole, um, you start getting into these areas that are where science, you know, you can apply some of these things within a fantasy game.
Mhm.
It's just that the framework and the way of exploring it is
Yeah.
different.
There's one interesting theory, and this is just a theory that we can't test, that the science can't
Please.
test yet, either disprove or prove, but it could be interesting from a fantasy perspective, is that when physicists now start looking at space, they realize that space was smaller, meaning it was denser, long time back ago. It was hotter, meaning today it's almost absolute zero, meaning minus whatever Kelvin, minus several hundred degrees. But back in the temperature was higher and higher and higher, and that then they simply say, what if the temperature were just around a bit over freezing temperature? If you raise the temperature, we know that space was infinitely hot at the Big Bang. At least that's as according to the current understanding of how this works, so to speak, physicists. But what if there was some spot or some time after they was infinitely hot and then it became cold, that is it today, when things were dense enough to be normal? Meaning, what if the whole universe was an ocean, meaning it was full of hydrogen and from early stars and stuff like that, so there were gases and stuff, and if they have the right temperature and pressure, they become liquid. What if there was a primordial ocean that was basically the whole universe, early on? And what if that lasted for 1 billion years or even more? What if the first primitive life forms developed in that ocean, universe ocean, long before there were planets or that we know of today, and then survived somehow in the bodies that were created? That means that panspermia that we talk about today was something that happened 10 billion years ago. And all the planet and bodies and stuff have this seed in them. Think about, this is just an idea. We have no idea of knowing if that was true or not yet, so to speak. We can't disprove it. We can't prove it. It's an idea. It's a theoretical possibility. But
It's a
in
hypothetical, yeah.
exactly. And in a fantasy world, what you can play with cool stuff like this in your, you can have a creation story, you can have stories of how things were back, that might explain things like magic, weird creatures, Cthulhu-esque stuff. There can be a truth behind the world as the characters see it, etc., etc., etc. You can thematically play with these things in a fantasy world that are really cool, so to speak. There's a truth to be seen, to be unveiled, or found out, or something like that.
Yeah, the one thing I would look at with that too is, again, since we're on the issue of horror,
Yeah.
would be how that affects how that could affect an environment, right? Like I'm thinking of something like,
You could
you
take,
have well, I'm just not going to say that you have, for example, within the framework of a game like D&D, you
yeah,
have as cosmic principles, right?
yeah,
Not just alignment, not just as markers of behavior, but you have chaos with a capital C and law or order with a capital L or O.
mm-hmm,
Um, if you take any one of those to its extreme, and something becomes hyper orderly or hyper chaotic, what happens to the system then?
yeah,
Like if you were to experience, and that kind of can tie into characters having bad dreams about possible outcomes of
mm-hmm,
adventures, right?
yeah,
So early D&D didn't have good versus evil. It had law and chaos, right?
yeah,
That was
mm-hmm,
it.
Yeah.
yep, that
Well,
was it.
Yeah.
yep.
And the,
Uh, You have, I mean, that be the thing, is this goes back to Paul Anderson, and it goes back to Michael Moorcock, that idea of law, chaos, and balance, or neutrality. Um, not neutrality the way that we think of it, but more the idea that existence requires both order and randomness, if that makes sense, is the way that kind of comes into play through these things. You have the hyper rational and you have the irrational. You have the highly ordered and hierarchical, and you have the random and how can I put this? The thing the thing that breaks the system. So yeah, those would be the kinds of things. And again, these are very, very much the kinds of things that we that I like to play with. Because again, this can be horror. If you think about it, one thinks that order and hierarchy are great, and they can be, but they can also be terrifying and hyper controlling, and in some ways lead to stagnation. In the same way that chaos, or freedom from a certain point of view,
Yep.
if one were to break things down, everything blurs, everything forms break down, identity breaks down, everything becomes fluid.
Yeah.
And
But
identity itself would be impossible.
yeah. Now I
Right.
need to put a warning, a caution warning to all of this, including what I said 2 minutes ago, is that now we're starting to get into the territory that I think we should come, the type of campaign that should come with a warning label, meaning the end of the world kind of scenario. The ring, if the characters fail this, the whole world will go, meaning Tharistun or something, you will take over the world and blow it up and so on. So, and this is the same thing, meaning try to localize it or put some sort of special conditions, say that only swamps that has these exact circumstances, this bad stuff will happen, so to speak, or something. So put some safeguards into it. Not
the worst kind of campaign is one that you're going to have that you're going to end it no matter what.
Exactly.
And you have nowhere to go. Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think here though, this would be the thing is that it doesn't only have to be a localized apocalypse, although that's possible. I mean, like a local catastrophe. You could just have it be the war that, and you sometimes get this in Moorcock stories, and I've always kind of dug it, and you get it in some of the Gord stories, even though it does ultimately lead in Gygax's novels.
That's a perfect example of things going literally to.
But if you notice early on, it's more like that Gord and the others are participating in a series, just as some of Moorcock's other characters do, in local skirmishes. Shall we say? Yeah, in other words, it's not even that the local area is going to be destroyed or whatnot. It's not even that the universe will be or the world will be destroyed.
Yeah,
it's that this is an aspect or a side battle or a skirmish within a larger context.
But to me, it's the interesting bit. The Gord stories, and now I'm meta reading the book, so to speak, is that it kind of tells the story of Gary's or reflects
disillusionment.
Yeah, Gary's relations with TSR and with D&D and with Greyhawk. He blows it up in the end, so to speak. It
creates
goes
a
downhill.
new world.
Yeah, and it's kind of you can, knowing the story, what happened to Gary and TSR. It's kind of interesting. You can read the Gord novels, if you read the ones from Infinity and the later ones, in that light, so to speak, and that can kind of, that's an interesting way of looking at it, that reality affected the books, so to speak.
If you want a subtle version of horror that you could introduce, this has messed with my players' minds in my ongoing campaign, since it was first introduced, or at least a couple of the players, where they met someone who was clearly not right in the head, and he kept having these kinds of panic attacks. And at one point he said to them, "Who are you? You shouldn't be alive. None of us should be alive. This world died before you were even born."
Well, that's messing with him. Holy jeez.
And what they figured out he was referring to, they calmed him down, and he said, "Yes, I meant this world, but I didn't mean this world." Meaning that Oath did die, a la Gygax's novels. Just this version of Oath didn't die. You have sealed off multiple Oaths and varying alternate timelines, and yeah, they should not be alive if they were part of that other timeline. Since the Oath died before they were born. in it. But they haven't completely gotten their brain around that or that nod. They know that there are multiple worlds and multiple possible outcomes, but it just freaked them to have someone tell them that they shouldn't have been born, because everything is already dead. This was a character who had experienced jumping across timelines in planes.
I
And,
even messed with it a couple
damage.
months ago, Les, and I wanted to make sure that it didn't get out of hand with the time jumping, right? But it did, because I got one of the groups I brought into the future because I like the group so much. So
and see, in mine, basically, if you were to go back in time, it would have severe repercussions in terms of generally travel is capable. You're generally capable of travel forward in time.
Right, and then you go back
Back
to your point,
in time, you start getting into paradoxes and loops and creating divergent timelines that then seal themselves off. You know, what's called the self-consistency principle, and stuff like that. But of course, none of my players have done well. Okay, some of them have traveled forward in time a few times. That's happened a few times, but none of them have gone into the past. They've had visions of the past and they've interacted with the past.
Yeah.
But that's a different kind of thing.
Absolutely. We've had a lot of interaction with the past leading up to the Hateful War scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But traveling forward in time, that's something you use in horror. What if they figure out that the villain that they're looking in the ancient grave, he just put himself forward in time and he's waiting around the corner to come and kill them, so to speak.
Oh, that's happened a few times.
Yeah, exactly. Meaning that's a classical way you can deal with that, not from the character's perspective. They are they're not doing it. They are on the receiving end of it. So you can, and they're a different way. Meaning undeaf is just a way of kind of pseudo biological time travel in that sense. You stay around longer and stuff, so you can have literal time travel. You can play with interesting stuff that way. And you can have like two versions of it. You go in and you see the Tomb of Horrors as it is today, and or like an illusion that what it looks like, and then the reality, everything is there and stuff, and you can kind of mix between the two, so the players don't know which one of these damn thing is it. A dusty old place that is been abandoned for 2,000 years, or is he still around, so to speak? You don't know which one, and you can kind of do things to go one way or the other or something like that. So there,
You know, now that we're talking about perception and time, and to some extent we're talking about psychology when we're talking about these things.
Horror is psychology.
This is a good time to bring up another related type of beastie, which I deeply love. Intellect devourers, brain moles, and rot grubs, and creatures like that.
Yes.
And now you're getting into a realm that I think is ripe for this. Is that you can have mind magic or version of psionics or the far realm, or the meaning the realms that aren't there, so to speak. You can have adventures not in physical space but in mental space, where time can be a difference, and you can have all sorts of cool. Meaning, what if the players are in their own character's dream? And I pulled that off for a bit. You can play with cool stuff like that. And that means that you can blow up the world because it's just in the dream of the characters. But that requires either that the character players know about it and they are playing along, or you can somehow pull it off and the players don't realize you're doing it. But the tricky bit with pulling it off, or trying to pull wool over the eyes of the players, is that afterwards you want them to realize at what point this mess started. So afterwards it should be obvious to them at what point this became an illusion or a dream or whatever it was, so to speak. But
I think sometimes we confuse, though, player with player character when it comes to this. That there have been multiple times, I won't say multiple, I can think of at least 3 times over the course of 6 to 8 years when player characters have had a dream and they have drawn something has attacked them, or they perceive something is attacking them. They've drawn their weapon and they've wound up attacking another party member, right? Who was awake. What I generally do then is I will have the player whose character is awake tell me how they're responding to the character who's freaking out. And the player who's playing the dreamer, I will explain what he's seeing and how do you respond to it. And they're generally good enough and committed enough role players. Well, they'll play it through until somebody punches somebody or, otherwise snaps them out of the dream that they're in. At which point the dream will be discussed and if it has any significance. And then, of course, what was the source of the dream? Is there some local influence causing it?
But Les,
so on and so forth.
Throw a little humor in here. You don't want to wake up a sleepwalker. Didn't you ever see Step Brothers?
True.
I couldn't help myself.
But I was going to mention, Anna, going back to what you were saying too.
Yeah, walking.
I think again, going back to Rob's blog, the some of these creatures, the brain moles and such, were inspired by a book called The Mind Parasites, which I don't think is that read often anymore. It's written by the same dude, Colin Wilson, who wrote a nonfiction study of the outsider, right? That type of in culture. But he's probably best known to a lot of people for a novel called The Space Vampires, which was made into the movie Life Force by Tobe Hooper.
I think I saw that. It came out in the 70s?
80s.
Was it 80s? Okay.
Yeah. And The Mind Parasites, anyway, was his kind of homage to the to Lovecraft, where you had these entities that were devouring the minds and consciousnesses of like the world's scientists, best scientists, etc. And this was apparently, he mentions it was basically inspired, that these creatures were inspired by that, and they were inspired by, of course, like various similar creatures throughout science fiction, pulp science fiction and stuff.
Cool.
But yeah, actually, yeah, Life Force is a cool example of and the novel it's based on. It takes some of these old tropes, some stuff. We were talking about vampires just a little while ago, and of course, Lost Caverns is going to come up in a conversation about that. But some of the stuff you find in Lost Caverns and in some of the other similar Gygaxian adventures, you can go back, trace its roots all the way back to H. Rider Haggard's She, which is another influence that you can find on the space vampires with that really, attractive.
Oh my God, vampire. What a terrible movie.
Which one? She?
Yeah, she wore yeah. But the vampires are in the house. They're in the mansion or whatever.
No. She is basically a queen of a lost race. There's a really crappy South African movie from the 80s. That's basically a B movie. It has Sandal Bergman going.
Right, that's what I'm talking about.
But that has no relationship.
Oh,
to the
it doesn't.
Novel.
Oh, okay.
It's basically ripped off the names and stuff from the novel. It has very little to do.
Oh,
there's a 1960s version that Hammer did that has like what's her name? Ursula Andress.
Oh, really?
And then there's a 1930s version that has the guy who used to play Watson in the old Basil Rathbone films as one of the main characters. And those two versions are closer. But at any rate, this is where you start getting into these at the fringes of empire, right? You have these lost civilizations, these decayed cultures, and these things that haven't died, whether they're still alive or whether they're undead. And that goes into, again, to plug the podcast, the Imperial Gothic episode we did on that is all about that kind of stuff and about some of the stuff that you would find with creatures in the hills. I also want to mention here, when we're talking about horrors, and we mentioned fairy tale stuff briefly, there was the Eric Mona adventure, for Living Greyhawk, River of Blood, which kind of takes the Gilles de Rais thing. Sir Bluto, from who's associated with White Plume Mountain, is part of the backstory. So it has this kind of Gilles de Rais. If those who know the notorious alleged vampiric or werewolf serial killer figure, possibly wrong, and it also ties in these children who have been abducted by the Blue Men, and it's very much reminiscent of an Arthur Machen story called The Little People, where this girl has been being prepared for her wedding day. Very unsettling. Has to do with little people, and as in a certain Fae type creature, or what people perceive, what people would call Fae. Strongly recommend to go ahead and look up. Again, give that podcast a listen. It goes into a little more explicit detail of some of these stories. But the thing is that, like, yeah, you have these kinds of ideas about, and I think the reason I mentioned that in this context is that here we're dealing with violation of personhood, right? You're dealing with monsters that violate the flesh or they violate the mind, and they alter, attempts to alter your identity, which is something that I always find fascinating, which of course brings up the question of illithids, which I think are wonderful, wonderful, horrible creatures. I know I mentioned the illithid when we were talking about this, Jay.
Yeah. Yeah, they always freaked me out too. I really like them as a and they just seem to be like those that they don't trust anyone and no one trusts them. Like the Drow made temporarily ally with them, then war with them, back and forth, and that's why I like them. They're not on anyone's side but their own. Similar to beholders, and that's like beholders are the same way. So, yeah. Dave, post a link to what? Which podcast? We talking about Greycast? Is that what you're talking about?
I think that's what he's talking
about.
Yeah.
Can someone? Because I know it changed locations. So if anyone,
I think it's back. I think it's back where it was. Let me pull it up.
Yep.
Let's see. I'll do Apple. How about that?
Okay.
If it's there. And it's not. Hold on.
Yeah, I thought it was on a different site.
I can. Here is the
Spotify
link.
Yeah, I've got the Apple link.
And then we have a Podtail. So
I don't think it's on. Is it on Spotify anymore?
Oh yeah, it's on Spotify.
All the new episodes.
I think so. That's
Okay.
why I
they got whatever it was.
Yeah, and
out.
there's the
Podtail. That's where I thought it went to. Yeah. Okay.
And there's Apple for anyone who uses that.
Cool, man. Thanks.
But these services, you only just use the RSS feed.
Right.
So if it fits the bill, they just put it there. So they hoover up all the podcasts they can.
Cool. Yeah. So how about we go over some specific topics in Greyhawk? Like I think we haven't discussed like a dungeon setting that may be
like Baltron's Beacon.
Well, I'm thinking more grandiose. I love Baltron's Beacon. How about this? Because I know you mentioned it when you had me put together stuff, and that's Moor Castle.
Oh yes, Moor Castle is a great example of where several things intersect. Right.
Right.
With the family that's isolated itself and pursued unnatural, pursued arcane practices. That's very much a kind of gothic thing. With some of the things involved in Moor Castle, with the your city of the elders and some of the other things that you can find there. These are very much mythos related flourishes and touches, and then of course you have Uncle, who Rob Kuntz has hinted at may be a certain Lovecraftian entity. And of course, the Silver Key that makes an appearance in Moor Castle is the Silver Key. There is, of course, Lovecraft's story, The Silver Key, one of his Dreamlands tales. So it incorporates all these elements so nicely into a Greyhawk setting. Yeah, it's very good. I was going to actually, if I think about it, now that I think about it, I'm going to pull up and post that link that I told you about that some people might find useful. It's an essay by Kuntz.
I have it right here.
With several adaptations. Yeah, Advent of the Elder Ones.
Here you go.
Mythos versus Man in the Lake Geneva Original Campaign, 1973 to 76.
What is he trying to relay here, if you can describe it?
The short version is that he is going over some of the Lovecraft influences from Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith.
Okay.
Particularly his love of Clark Ashton Smith that you find in when he was DMing back in the day. And so these are the things that he worked into the early campaign. You'll notice some elements that are almost science fictional.
Right.
But they're science fictional in the same kind of way that Lovecraft or Clark Ashton Smith deployed science fiction elements in their narratives. It's that bizarre blend of fantasy, science fiction, horror, and weird fiction.
Look, Michael Mornard's even replied down here on this.
Yep.
Huh. Wow, that's pretty cool. And this is from 5 years ago. So this is 2019 post.
Yeah, it was originally posted in a zine.
Oh my God, look at that. 5 years to the day.
Yep.
Wow, that's weird. That's weird. Yeah, it's usually published in a zine, and so it's just some cool artwork, and so just talking about what
Gustave Doré, I believe.
Yeah, about his talking about in '73 all his thoughts on this. So it's really cool. And even the Maze of Zane here, a lot of stuff that goes into. And here's Dark Druids too, Tharizdun storyline. So yeah, and he goes.
And then it gets into if you scroll down past those, he gets into the actual kind of describing.
Yeah. Wow. Tie-ins. There's a lot here. You probably want to absorb this on your own time because it's Rob talking a lot, and it goes on and on and on about, I guess, what he is attempting to do. So.
Yeah, what he was doing back in the day.
That's a great find, man.
And
great find.
And I think one of the other things that we forget, Rob, of course, brought this up when he was on your show, and this is something, like I said, it may not be canonical Greyhawk per se, as in the published Greyhawk. I don't care. As soon as I heard about it, I had to incorporate it into my Greyhawk's backstory. But the idea that you have between Greyhawk City and Greyhawk Castle, you have that temple, right?
Yeah.
Of the what's it called? The Latter-day Elder ones.
Well, there's stuff in here I've never even knew. It's just like here, Mythos, Greyhawk City sewers. Mythos aligned beings still have outposts here to secure underworld passages to and from the temple of the Latter-day Elder ones. With their war with the Thieves and Assassins Guild, who are attempting to control all underground traffic in the city. That's news to me. I mean, that never made it to publication anywhere, right?
No, it
had come up in some interviews and things, and as soon as I heard the phrase, I'm sorry, there's the Temple of Latter-day Elder Ones is going in my campaign.
Well, look at this thing right here. The Tome of Black Mold. Original City of Greyhawk sub-level adventure. One or more tomes that one best not open. Don't know anything about that either. Well, at least we have some topics to talk to him about next time, right? At minimum.
At minimum.
Yeah, at minimum. I've never discussed this stuff with him ever. So let me start getting my notes down here. Even though I could just go back to this, but I want to notate this. So.
Well, also, if you want, I'll go ahead and I'll post. Let me find it. The blog it's a blog entry that he did that's really neat that I've been kind of citing here, which is called kind of related to this. It's called Taking D&D Back to Its Future Level Part 1, where he's listing everything: Mind Flayers, Tharizdun, Cube of Force, Magic Missile, Giant Ants, Carrion Crawlers, Doppelgangers, and he's telling you what the inspiration behind those were and who created them.
Yeah.
Like whether it was Arneson, Gygax, or him.
This is a Facebook post. It's linked. Michael, scroll up. Yeah,
and this will be the blog post that I'm posting as well.
Okay.
And that's definitely worth having a look at if you're interested in the origins of some of these.
Lord of the Green Dragons, yeah. So I don't think that made it into any of his writings that I'm aware of. So, yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Ral.
Great find. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It also gives us some more topics to discuss with him next time I have him on.
And I think it goes towards my earlier point about how within the very kind of DNA of the game, the early DNA, if you will, that kind of primordial pool from which contemporary role-playing games emerged, you have that mixture of elements. You have that great mixture of science fiction, horror, and fantasy, and weird fiction, and the Gothic, and TV and B movies from the 50s.
Right.
And that's why the horror elements are kind of interesting. It's interesting to see where he took them. He also gets into the discussion about that, again, that kind of idea about how you don't quite, there's another post I think that he posted somewhere where he was interested in doing a Greyhawk, an alternate kind of Greyhawk that was just overrun by darkness, that basically the Cthulhu type entities had vanquished.
That's easy to do. He could have done that right off of Q1 if he wanted to.
Oh yeah, well,
You know, that would have been a
that's
place I would. There is one that's kind of like that where it's perpetually twilight, right? It's perpetually dark.
Well, in this case, it would just be crawling with abominations.
Yeah.
And I mean that would be the other thing is I love you know you going back to discuss this. You know, I'd mentioned Baltron's Beacon, but something else that I have a fondness of, and it comes up in that blog post, would be oozes and jellies and things of that nature.
Yeah.
I really, because there's just something, you know, repulsive. There's something that when you look at a mass that's going to absorb you and digest you, or you're watching it digest someone or something, it's viscerally upsetting and therefore fascinating.
I shouldn't do
To
this,
me.
but I'm going to, because I'm going
Well,
to.
it's
Yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead,
I
Anna.
was going to say that's the interesting. As
I
soon
got
as you, meaning one of the standard tropes in all fantasy and all horror stories and folk tales, whatever, is you take the small world and you blow it up. Meaning insects and microlife, just blow it up and makes us small compared to them. It becomes scary. That's it's such a awesome way of doing it. So just take oozes, meaning take MAB and all the little life bacterias and smaller life and make them large enough to eat us, and they become terrifying.
Well, I think that's where you know, for lack of a better
I gotta find it.
point, there were I'm trying to remember. Once people started, you know, he had the development of microscopes and this interest in things.
Yep.
That's actually when this starts coming about. You have
Well, yeah, humans needed to see it first. When we saw that these things actually exist, then wow, what if they were big? Yeah.
well, not only that, but it's like the idea of you know, to some extent, some of the Lovecraftian entities are like that. But you also have I think one of the very first examples that we have of that is God, I want to say it's like a 1900 story. Let me think of what it is right quick. Anyway, it's the idea is that this scientist develops an ooze, and there's actually if you're familiar with the George R. R. Martin story, The Sand Kings, where there's that kind of creature that the person's taking care of. There's a story that was in Weird Tales in the 20s called The Ooze, curiously enough. And there's this great passage. Someone winds up basically, this amoeba is growing and growing, right? And just right quick, I'm just going to read this and tell if it doesn't sound like something that a mad wizard would do in Greyhawk. Lee took the rubbery, translucent giant cell, but he did not obey orders. Instead of destroying it as his father had directed, Lee thought out a plan. Suppose he should grow this organism to tremendous size. Suppose, when the tale of his father's accomplishments were spread, an amoeba of many tons weight could be shown in evidence. Lee, of somewhat sensational cast of mind, determined instantly to keep the secret the fact that he was not destroying the organism, but encouraging its further growth. Thought of possible peril never crossed his mind. He arranged to have the thing fed, allowing for normal increase in size in an abnormal thing. It fooled him only by growing much more rapidly. When he came back from Cuba, the amoeba practically filled the whole of the mud sink hollow. He had to give it much greater supplies. The giant cell came to absorb as much as 2 hogs in a single day. During daylight, while hunger still was appeased, it never emerged, however. That remained for the time it could secure more food near at hand to satisfy its ravenous and increasing appetite.
So
I'm like, there you go, and that's from like a 1923 short story.
Wacky. Yeah, you're onto something. Yep, this
So,
is what led to the giant space, the miniature giant space hamsters. Yep.
it must be published somewhere in a dragon or something. But a necromancer's highest level spell level is 7th. I have the spell amorphous blob, and it is the blob, right?
Yeah.
So, and only necromancers can cast it when you think about it, because it really is just killing everything and just eating everything, you know. But that's kind of like cool. I mean, that's as hard as you can get. We did have a creature once that drove Bill crazy, the most horrific I've ever done I can think of, and it's in one of those third edition books. It's called an atrocity white, and basically it is the bodies of all of a mass casualty event, a killing off or something,
Yeah.
and they all form a giant monstrous. It's almost the amalgamation of all those bodies create the monster. That freaked him out. So much so that Bill said I was never allowed to use it again. It just pissed him off. It did, because it had like 40 hit die or something crazy. And for second edition, that's nasty. But like the deaths of all they all were either slaughtered or they're all executed or whatever, and they all came back as an atrocity. Rose and just killing everything randomly and for revenge. It was cool. So, yeah, we showed to bring Mather there, BB. That's one of my favorites on a small level. Yeah.
Well, that's I think Mother, who was just raised,
The
Mother the Lalara,
yeah,
is another great example. I mean, I strongly suspect that both the Lalara and the Drow, to different extents, were inspired by a great and neglected novel by Margaret Sinclair called The Shadow People.
Really? Drow too, huh?
Yeah, it has to do with it's a modern day. It's set in the modern day. It's on Appendix N, as is her Sign of the Labrys, but it has to do with a subterranean race that kidnaps somebody, and the protagonist goes to hunt for his kidnapped love, and he discovers basically this debauched race of what he realizes people once would refer to as elves or fairies, who there's psychedelic mushrooms involved, there's cannibalism involved, there's addiction to milky substances involved. It's a great novel. I mean, it's a really great and underappreciated kind of a fantastical novel from the 60s, of course. And like I said, it was on his Appendix N list. And I believe it might have been on one of his earlier lists that he did in Dragon Magazine as well.
Is the Time Machine on his N list?
No, it isn't. But
I'm surprised.
That's the obvious influence on the Morlocks. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Okay. Huh. That is just like, you won't get that anywhere else either. The legendary writings on that. Some of the people, I'm sorry, Wolfgang, and probably some who respect and honor it will maybe do their references off of it, or maybe, oh my gosh, Monty Cook. But I don't see that anywhere else. You know what I mean? Showing all the references, and that proves one thing, and that is, you may think, and mine probably is, that Greyhawk is a medieval base setting, but there's a lot of it that's not. Right? It's a mix.
Oh, yeah.
It's a mix of a lot of different things. So
But it's also, I was going to say, it's kind of interesting that if you look, there's a draft of Expedition to the Barrier Peaks that you can see a photo of on Rob's blog, and he points out that the original draft is far more kind of science fiction / horror.
Right.
Which I think kind of goes towards the point of that, these genres weren't always as clearly defined.
Right.
And you can do all kinds of nifty things by tweaking. And again, I mean, some of these creatures just kind of cross genre lines. I mean, you could have for example, these slimes and oozes fit nicely in either science fiction or fantasy. The Displacer Beast is taken from an A.E. Van Vogt science fiction short story, right? In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it's one of the stories that the creators of the film Alien got sued for using as a source of inspiration, shall we say.
Okay.
So there's that. Yeah, anyway, there we go. That's me talking and rambling.
That's all right, man. That's okay. Thanks, Michael. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we had a death in the joust, John. But they were right there, the priests and all of the Order of Ulick. I mean, there's a rod of resurrection right there. So, and that'll get you back if there's a piece of you with no, and it's automatic too. There's no in old school. There's no save or, there's no save needed or system shock. By the way, if you played Baldur's Gate 2 and you went up against that red dragon in it, you needed that rod of resurrection. Trust me. To bring back all the party members got wiped out by it. So, but yeah, that was it was a fun time. It really was. So, yeah. So Rob Kuntz is, I've been doing a lot of Dark Druids against the Narwhal Headhunters. More and more, I just love picking stuff out of here. Making them worship some other deities. I've thrown Zogdemoy in there. Um, besides Tharizdun, because they're it's just great content, and it has a real horror aspect to it. Yeah, so a really good adventure series. I'm using it more as a setting, and then I haven't even run an adventure in it yet. So that's a real good one. Absolutely. Let me see what else here we haven't picked through. All right, let me go through. I gotta go through a couple of mine just so I don't forget them because.
Yeah.
We all know every Halloween I run something, right? And I didn't run it last year because I ran something else. But thank you, Patrick, for doing that. But I'm running. I've run this, and that is Mike Disney's. And he's got a whole backstory about how this horrid thing,
Oh yeah.
the Overgord, was created, right? So
Mhm.
Nice.
That's so cool.
awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it. So the Overgord, and what I've done with it is I've American Horror Storied it so that it appears in a different story every time I use it. It's a little bit
Nice.
different, right? Because the spirit of it is always around, and something is taking it on. I know Mike already had the hag. They sacrificed a hag, and she came back with revenge. But I kind of liked a couple other stories I did on it. But yeah, it can be powerful, or there's stats on it. But I tend to make them up based on the level of the characters I'm taking up against them. And one time there was a witch there, and it was her son's spirit in it. All sorts of things. And then the other one I did was, which I found cool, was Christine Van Patten last year did, and Curtis, I still have them because you never got them. At Gary Con, they were in my
Oh.
box, so I need to send you that in your figure here, which is sitting right here on my desk still. The Wicker Witch, and I thought that this was really neat. Just a really neat concept where you could turn them into where you animated people into wicker creatures, or you made them yourself from scratch. So I really love this idea for a Halloween horror fantasy. There's the paint jobs that Bill did for him. So yeah, with some other posted skeletons. So it was a really neat set. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do this year, but it was a fun one last year. We did hers because she had made up all the, she had done it, and so we'll see. I got a couple weeks still, but just know that horror is it can be tough to do in D&D. You really need your players' attention, as Anna and
Yeah, I
and the
think
audience
it's
had said.
difficult in role-playing games overall. It's one of
Yeah.
the more difficult genres to do
Yep.
right, and especially in a long-term campaign. I think it's better to do it now and then, so to speak. And if you have a game that it's supposed to be based on it, then on the other hand, if you have a game then and advertise it as being a horror game, then you might attract players who are very into it. So way more than I am. So in that sense, you might attract the right players, so to speak, and the right DMs for it too. So yeah, it
Yeah.
Well,
might be.
I think also you need to again, this is the weird thing is we're framing it at times as a campaign. Whereas I would say a campaign with elements. I mean, again, some of these things that we're describing here, they weren't necessarily endpoints of the original campaign. They were elements or things that players could explore with it, almost at times side quests even, or side stories, right? Or they were flavor. Like
Yeah.
there's something that could be going on that the players can encounter. I like to think of it as, periodically to break up the main narrative. You might have a side plot or a side
Yeah.
episode, if that
Yeah, I
makes
mean, you
sense.
can have it as a consequence. If something goes wrong, so to speak, then it becomes more horror-esque or something. So yeah.
Or, the characters, I mean, the characters ride into the middle of a horror story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I've done that a few times where things, their plan isn't something entirely separate, but they ride into somebody else's mess.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes their mess. if they choose not to just throw everything to the side and let it go to hell, that is. Although sometimes that might not be an option if something infects them or, they're otherwise motivated. So yeah, that's a thing to consider. The other thing, is, and I always kind of like cringe about this, but there's been player agency is also something to give a little bit of thought to. To what degree are your player characters, if you're dealing with something like possession, or you're dealing with something like being turned into a vampire or werewolf or eldritch abomination, right?
Mm-hmm.
How comfortable is your player with having that done to their character?
Yep.
And it's one of those things again where you want to sit down and you want to talk. I've been fortunate enough, speaking again, thinking of what happened this weekend. One of my players this weekend pitched me a backstory for his character, and I went along with it. And what happened was during the Friday night adventure, periodically he would be hearing voices that were telling him that you belong down here with us. um, and when the cult figure in its mask turned and looked at him, there's a sudden chill of recognition
They all float
on his
down
part.
here.
Like this figure that's walking past on the other side of a portal turns and looks, and he looks at it, and there's a weird kind of chill of recognition that occurs in him. That he's never seen this before, never seen the mask before, never seen the robe before, but this weird sense that somehow I know this, and this is something I should know further. Yeah, and it tends to creep people. And when he starts talking, it's pretty disturbing stuff coming out of his mouth to the other players, right? That's kind of fun, and that's an example of how it can. I hope it can be done to everyone's entertainment.
And like I said, you have to have the players for it. The players that want to experience that kind of game, and sometimes that's tough. That's tough. But and the setting is difficult too. I assume, I maybe sometimes it's a little more difficult to do it over Zoom than in person. But give it a shot. There's so much horror aspect out there for Greyhawk. I mean, there truly is. There's a lot of great things. He said, I love Forgotten Temple of Tharistan. Love it. I love the Elder Elemental God.
And I love, I've always
Yeah, we
loved
talked about that early, Curtis. Yeah.
molds that can take control of your mind, and oozes that digest you, and
I love the
gelatinous
the
cubes.
enveloper, which is
Yeah.
really bizarre monster, right? I think it's in Fiend Folio.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just will absorb someone and it'll get their memories and even their spells. It's just a mass of flesh walking about. Always can be really nasty. It's another one, a takeover creature.
Oh, I know what I was going to mention, actually. I
Go
was going
for
to
it.
come back
We
to
got
the
a couple
Spine
minutes.
Castle thing.
Yeah, please.
So, Hirian Drogue appears in the piece that Gary co-authored about Spine Castle back in the day. He is the priest of the Temple of Erythnal. He is of Orcish blood, but he has troll blood in him as well, I believe it mentions. And he's been thrown out of Spine Castle multiple times, but keeps returning. He's been written off by the Temple of Hexdor for years because the Erythnalites tend to turn on each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
In my campaign, he is gearing up to be a major villain. In that, while everything has been going to hell in Spine Castle over the last several years, the number of Erythnalites has grown. The hopeless have turned. Um, a number of gnolls, increasing number of gnolls have turned, shedding their way on their old faith towards Erythnal. Of course, you have bugbears and other wantons turning towards him, and then there's the matter of his visions. This is my little addition to him. He has the symbols of Hextor and Hieronius tattooed on the soles of his left and right foot. so that he can permanently trample. Every time he walks, he tramples their holy images underfoot, just as these false usurper gods will be trampled under the feet of the righteous when we rise.
Wow.
He also is racked by pain. He was born slightly deformed, and his troll blood is constantly trying to make his body whole again, which causes him excruciating pain, which he sees as a blessing from his god, and receives visions. And he will lash out and then read in the blood and gore of those he has slain what Erythnal has told him, what his vision meant.
Oh, geez.
He is also recruited from the spine bred, those mixtures, those amalgamations and hybrids, the mongrel men, if you will, of Spine Castle. And he is also, for the other spine bred, set up a false priest who is an illusionist, who is performing false miracles for the spine bred, and teaching them that they are discarded now, but they have been blessed with the blood of Moxlick the serpent. They are the true inheritors. They are the true inheritors of magic in this world as the serpent sleeps, and their day, their destiny, approaches once the false gods of the purebloods have been purged. So yeah, there you go.
Well, that sounds cool.
So there you go, an element of horror there, I think.
Yeah. Excellent.
And I'm glad Gary approves of what I did with Hirian.
Gary, you're just a glutton for punishment. It's just like all the people, including me, playing in Tim's game, and I played in City State, and everyone else here plays it in Greyhawk, and they take Tim's abuse. You just come back for more. You're gluttons for punishment. So, we all are, which is great. You enjoy it. You enjoy the tricks and the trades and the horror and the surprises and all the awfulness. But that's the great thing about DMing.
And of course, I should point out that not all spine bred are drawn to this, but again, those who do, there's a nihilistic turn in spine bent, right? There's a kind of people who've suffered so horribly that they want others to experience suffering, or they just want it all to burn the hell down. And Drogue and his false priest that he's propped up, a false priest of Moxlick. Yeah, he's basically it's going to unleash something. They're going to be pretty horrifying in the years to come in my campaign.
We're going to have an argument on chat in a second here. Watch. I'm calling Gary out. Just kidding. Spine bred are the second and third generation hybrids from the ravaging, like the mongrels and the putrid tongue are better. So, but they're all.
Oh, the Erythnalites, Jay, have a. Speaking of horror, I might as well throw this out too. The Erythnalites have a special healing potion made from troll blood.
Nice.
And they like to basically make sure that you're right on the cusp of dying when they impale you on a pole after you've been fed this, so that you'll remain alive with the pole protruding from your mouth.
Yeah, that's like that's not good.
These are things that we should kind of talk about on session 0 before you even.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And this would be when you get into the full-on body horror and you're comfortable with your players.
Yes, yeah. And that's something to always emphasize, that is something that only should be if everybody around the table consent to it and be discussed beforehand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the same is true, I mean, of the tongue thing. I mean, there might be some people who might be upset by tongue ravaging.
I show them the Tim video first, always.
Yeah. Well, that tends to take the edge off a little bit.
It does, because it's like shocking, and then you start laughing at it from that point on.
Disclaimer for streamer audience: yes, this is not for kids. This is. Not
I have it set to an adult audience there, Dave. I always do.
Okay, good. Okay,
because I don't, we don't want 12-year-olds and 10-year-olds in here like watching this stuff. I mean, with their parental supervision, kids in high school and all, it's great. So, you got it. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Pat, this is Pat and Dave. This is the reason why. First off, I'm not always. People have asked me why I don't stream, and part of the reason is that I kind of am used to the intimacy with my group.
Yeah, it's
and
a
I know my group,
different world.
and also I don't, yeah, you get into that thing where you're not only reacting to the group, but you're reacting to an audience, and you can't always say who the audience is or where the audience's
Or you
priorities or
can't.
boundaries
You
are.
can't, but
Twitch,
I love that. Right? So our game is better because of the audience. Trust me.
Oh, I don't doubt it. I'm saying that
Yeah.
probably for my players, and we've discussed it before. Also, some of my players would not feel comfortable being presented on a live stream, if that
Oh
makes
yeah,
sense.
I understand that.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's one of those things. And again, there's not a right or a wrong answer to that any more than there is to, again, what degree of horror do you want, right?
Right.
If I'm running a con game, the troll potion is not going to come into it, right? On the other hand, if I'm running my regular campaign, my players are used enough to the idea that could do something horrible. They're kind of used to that. There are lines, of course. There are boundaries that I won't cross. And I
Right.
think that's kind of important to establish. Greyhawk should never become, however dark, because there are some portions of the Gord novels that are extremely risque and or violent and or imply some stuff that's profoundly
Oh
unsettling.
yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. But it's
I,
implied.
it's implied. There are a few things that I would argue where language-wise, and actually in a description of something, that it was kind of unsettling. It was the
Yeah.
murder of one of the characters in the first
When the
novel.
guy gets crushed.
When the girl is killed and her
Oh,
body's dumped
okay.
in
I
the
thought you
street.
meant when the
Yeah.
Guildmaster gets crushed.
Um. See, there you go. That didn't even faze me because he deserved it. But no,
Whoops.
my thing is like there are certain things like that where it's gonna be heartbreaking, and are you doing it for shock, or does this serve a purpose? And the thing is that, like, when I do it, it generally a character. The Erythrolites have an ideological purpose in doing this, if that makes sense. They want they want slaughter, they want demoralization of their opponents, etc.
Right.
It's not simply because I'm trying to be gruesome. And a matter of fact, if it makes you think that the Erythrolites, that group of Erythrolites, needs to be exterminated, you're probably reacting correctly and as a moral human being. Um, so yeah, but on the other hand, I'm not going to do it with every crew, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Understood. Understood. So, what a great discussion. I knew we were going to go deep on this one.
Mhm.
So, Anna, anything in closing?
Well, I want to say that a dose of this, I think, is really good, or two or three is good. I think a great ingredients in any game, but it's something you need. It's like salt, or spices. Take the right amount, and how much that is very much up to your game and your players and the situation, so to speak. But it's something that I think a little bit of this, more or less, depending on, is a good thing for the game, so to speak. You need to have some things that can go from thriller-esque mystery all the way down the slippery slope into the worst of horrors, so to speak. Where you want to be on that one, it's up to you, but somewhere on that slippery slope is probably good to be quite often, or now and then. Yeah.
I would also say it depends on what you're putting on the table.
Yeah.
The dish, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's good occasionally to have that kind of thing where the characters sigh in relief that they managed to escape some unspeakable, unmentionable horror,
Mm-hmm.
or that they managed to isolate it or defeat it or whatever. I would also say that to remind yourself that there's a variety of degrees. We haven't really touched on. I mentioned the Raven, and I mentioned Reanimator. There's a
Right.
whole range of comedic horror, right?
Mhm.
Some Peter Jackson's early films come to mind, um, and some other things come to mind. But like, you don't always have. Little Shop of Horrors is simultaneously a horror and a comedy, and in one case, a musical as well. Um, So there's a whole wide variety, and it's a matter of effect and modulation, if that makes sense. How do you want to turn the knob? Do you want to crank it up to 11? Do you want it at
Let's go
about
to 11.
a 7 or 8
That's
with
funny.
maybe a prevailing countertone of laughter? How serious do you want it to be?
Right.
Army of Darkness, another example, a great other example. To some extent, the whole Evil Dead franchise at parts, except for some of the later stuff. Um, I mean, let's face it, Bruce Campbell, it has great comic timing
I'll
in those
say.
films. So yeah, again, and we veered, I think, from the
That's okay.
Lovecraftian to the gory, and I think that is okay. It's
Sure.
But again, know your table and be careful, and also in a way know yourself, know what you're capable of carrying off uh, in such a way that it works. Because I have seen DMs who try to be, for lack of a better term, edge lords. If you know what I mean, they're
Right.
pushing the hardcore. Man, this is grim and gritty and awesome. Uh, this is extreme with 3 X's.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean that's fine. That's fine if that's what you want to do, but realize that that's not to everyone's taste, and it may not suit the particulars of the campaign. Also, think about where your thing is taking place. The lands of Ayus or Spine Castle or portions of the great, what was once the Great Kingdom are going to be a little, or the Pomage. That's going to be a little darker than certain other areas.
Oh, absolutely.
So think about
Absolutely.
that.
By the way, to celebrate this horror one, if you already have them, then we'll do something else. But here for the winner, Ravenloft and Ravenloft 2. So there you go.
Electric Boogaloo.
All right. So what a fun discussion here as we went deep, giving you some ideas on horror and its place in Greyhawk, which it has a place in Greyhawk. So I've been looking for a stream to raid into, and I think I found what was going on.
Yeah.
I was gonna raid in a dungeon run, which is another partnered stream event, and then I go in, I ask, it's not live, it's pre-recorded. I'm not raiding to a pre-recorded thing. What good's that? So I found another one. But let's see what's going on with everyone. I got a 2-part series adventure this Thursday and Saturday. We'll talk about in a second. But Anna, what's going on?
I've just posted today on my Patreon blog October update, kind of a follow up to my seminar, and with some little news and things coming up concerning Game Hall Con and stuff. And also, I'm not going to post them on my Patreon blog yet, but I've almost filled out the Ayusian spell, so that is from 1st to 9th level. Remember we have the chilling mist at number 5 is one of the ones that we have. We have the chain madness at number 6, claw cloud at number 6, and I've added 1st level pain of the old one, 3rd level wrath of the old one, 2nd level I'm not sure what to name it yet, so to speak, and then 5th level I have another one, wall of pain. And then we have the classic chain madness at 6th level. I love it. I tweaked it for Hawktails a bit.
Of course.
And then I've added at 7th level that is chain pain. That one is really cool. And then at the 9th level there is Dome of Despair. And at 8th level there is a cool one I'm not going to say the name of yet, so to speak. But these are I would say I use instruments of power. Don't see them as spells that just do a quirky little effect. I use instruments of power. This is how Ayus wields his power through these spells. And I'm going to introduce more of them, so there will be more than one on each level, so to speak. But I try to craft them not to give like the individual power to the cleric, but they are spells that wields Ayu's power. They spreads his power and his influence and so on, and shapes his domain, so to speak. That's the light you should see these spells. So they're not
Awesome.
spells that they're not there for the benefit of his clerics. They're there for the benefit of him. And yeah.
Do you have a stream Friday?
Yes, yep, I'll do my very, very best, and I will showcase or look into a new version of World Machine. A miracle have happened, so we got a
Nice.
new version of World Machine. So I will probably play with that one on Friday. I can't resist. I haven't had time to play with it
Awesome.
yet, so yep, so that's coming.
Very, very cool. Les.
Man, so I after Virtual Greyhawk Con, I have I'm finishing up playtesting an adventure that some of the lads over on Cannon Fire have done. Gotta say the playtest is coming along swimmingly. My party is having a great time with the adventure, and hopefully it will see publication fairly in the near future, so that you guys can get a blast out of it as well. It is a remarkable adventure, and the first, I believe, in a series that they're going to be producing. I've also got some various hush hush projects that I'm working on, question mark. And I also have some other articles and things that I will be working on that will hopefully see the light of day sometime in the foreseeable future. And other than that, my ongoing campaign, I should also mention, I've been talking about Spine Castle.
Yep.
After we're done playtesting, we enter the final arc of the Spine Castle stretch. So we'll be able to see what becomes of Spine Castle, whether any of the player characters survive, and what the heck is left, and what the situation for Radek Neural in the North Kingdom winds up being.
It's Erdiak. You got to call it by its real name.
I refuse to, because I hear that, and I start thinking,
come on,
she's Erdiak on the floor. So, and we're not going to do Flashdance with this. I'm sorry.
Hey, thanks for doing that, Rob, and thank you so very much, Les, for coming on. Great discussion.
And also, I should, before we go, again mention the podcast. Like I said, if you go over, they have a bunch of great episodes. I don't only mean to plug the ones. Yep. It's just that those were relevant to this discussion.
Yeah.
I do an Appendix N and adjacent series with them, where we look at works that influenced Greyhawk and the early D&D and related works that may not have been mentioned, but nonetheless had some kind of influence.
Cool.
And they also have regular guests. I know that they've had you were on. Gary's been on.
Yep.
I've been on 3
you've
times.
Been on.
Yep.
Mike Shea's been on.
Yeah.
It's a great podcast. Give it a listen, guys. That's Greycast.
Yep. It's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, definitely worthwhile. The boys do a fine job with it.
Yep. Definitely.
I didn't get this terrain out at all last year, and I'm thinking to myself, I got an Ed game Saturday, and I'm going for it. So, yes, the table is ready for this. Yes, there's a dwarven encampment here. Wonder what that's all about. Well, you're going to find out tomorrow. By the way, I'm going to use that miniature for your character right there, Jeremy. That one right there with the axe. So I'll use that one. It's a good one. That's a Christine Van Patten. So, a 2-parter. So the first part is basically Stop the Wave. So Knights of Ulican, Time of the Season, Part 1 of a 2-part series. Special guest Coco Bunny. Notice I got her with her tongue out one. And Curtis playing Fritz. And that'll be Thursday nights. So that's Part 1, okay, of this. Part 2 is Saturday. Ed, Tony, Eric, Jeremy Astrolier, Anna Little Bird. That's, of course, if you can make it, and I'm assuming you're available.
Oh, so, you have a good time. I might be rushing in at the I'm up, but I can make it 3 in the afternoon. I can make it. Yep.
Yeah. So and that's at 6 Eastern, and that'll be Part 2. So yep. Yeah. And that's it. And then we'll have a gathering on Sunday night, which I don't know what I'm going to do, but the Sunday after is Timothy Brannon finally on the 20th. So yep. Got it going. I get that all worked out. So let's Here we go. Giveaway. Let's see who wins it. Last call, exclamation point drawing. And we'll see. What's up, Coco? We'll see you tomorrow night for the game. And here we go. Closing it out. Let's see who wins. Tonight's winner is Captain Mymorph. The new Captain Mymorph. I think you had an old right. Something happened with your other one. So let me know if changes, address, all that. So we're set. Yeah, we'll go for that. And so I'm gonna try I'm gonna try a new channel. Why not? I'm gonna go into Forge of Lore. No, it looks like they're chapter 100 special. So, and they're using Tailspire too. Why not? I have no idea what it's about, but I'll give a small stream with under 500 followers a little hit here. So, yeah, and we'll see you all tomorrow night. Thanks, Les. Thanks, Anna, for a great discussion.
Hey,
so,
thanks for having me, and thanks for
course.
joining us,
thank
guys.
you.
Me tomorrow night, Anna Friday night, and then me Saturday night, Sunday night for a nice weekend. So we'll see you all.
One last time for the folks. There you go.
Yep, please. Always link. All right, see you all soon. Everyone have a great night. I hit the wrong button. Woo! Hit the wrong button. There you go. That's a picture one.
It's a sunset.
That's
yeah.
wrong too. That's wrong. All right, there we go. Oh my God. They're all mixed up. They're all jumbled up on my Legends and Lore set, not on my Gavin set. So bing, bing, bing. Yeah, give it to me hard there. That's what she said. Oh my God. One second.
Oi.
Yeah, now let me find this here. Let me go here. Let me go here.
Take care, guys.
Yeah,
be well.
Mine want to reach out to you on Discord. Stream manager. This shit's all over the place. Please stick in for the raid and say hello. I don't know what they're about, but it looks kind of cool. And they're using Tailspire, which is cool, which, Blue Box is really getting into. So, see if we can get 70. All right, cool. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. See you tomorrow night.